That will bring us to LB 167. I will ask those of you who are waiting, and I know some of you have come since 1:30 when I initially spoke. We are going to enforce the 3-minute timer and ask that we move through the chairs and be respectful of the time, just so that more people have an opportunity to be heard. And also, I'm just going to say, we appreciate this issue is important to both sides. This entire Judiciary Committee appreciates this issue is important to both sides. If someone has expressed your sentiment, please consider letting that be enough. Because, having 10 people say the same thing is not, it hits a point of diminishing returns. And that's true with both sides. And with that, Senator Hunt to introduce LB 167.
I need just one moment. I apologize.
Go ahead.
My opening statement isn't in my binder.
Oh. All right,
sorry, it might just be.
Just one of those practical stuff.
I'm very sorry. I obviously tried to prepare for this and failed, so that's not a surprise. But
no.
Thank you.
So while we're waiting for Senator Hunt's notes to arrive, is everyone who wants to speak in support standing in line? Okay, so now I know what the line looks like. How many people are here to testify in opposition? Okay. Will, maybe because I somehow have a problem with it just being quiet in this large room with this many people. I will share with you that we have received an awful lot of mail on this. As a committee, not just as the chair of this committee, but the committee members have as well. We understand an awful lot of the points of view that we'll hear expressed today, and I know, this is your opportunity to interface with the legislature, and we appreciate that. Just be mindful that repetitious testimony will keep us here late into the evening. We found another way.
I bet this is my most recent version. So.
Senator Hunt to open on LB 167.
Thank you for your understanding and your patience. I know that we're all very tired, and I'm not helping with that, so thank you for your support. Good afternoon, Chairman Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm Senator Megan Hunt, MEGANHUNT, and I represent District 8 in Midtown Omaha. LB 167 is a bill to prohibit charging money for or advertising for the sale of conversion therapy under the Uniform Credentialing Act, impacting medical professionals. 15 states and D.C. have passed similar legislation banning this practice. Conversion therapy, which is also referred to as reparative therapy, refers to interventions meant to alter a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. This practice is grounded in the incorrect and debunked belief that being LGBTQ is an undesirable affliction to be corrected. Contemporary science recognizes that being LGBTQ is part of the natural spectrum of human identity. Gay people can marry, gay people can adopt, and there is cultural consensus on the humanity and dignity of this community, which is my community. Conversion therapy is meant to correct a problem that does not exist, and throughout recent history has included institutionalization, castration, forced sexual interactions, lobotomization, electroconvulsive shock therapy, and psychotherapy and talk therapy. Regardless of the medium, whether you're castrating somebody or giving them electroshocks while showing them gay pornography, or whether you're just doing talk therapy, these treatments have proven to be ineffectual and harmful. A growing body of research overwhelmingly demonstrates that conversion therapy is not rooted in medically sound practices, is unethical, and causes substantial harm, especially in adolescents. That's why national professional health organizations have condemned the practice, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Counseling Association, the American Psychological Association, the National Association of Social Workers, and many others. I've handed out a list, which I'm sure is not exhaustive, of organizations that oppose this therapy. I really hope you take a look at it because I want to be sure that in the future on the floor, we aren't saying things like the American Medical Association recommends cancer screenings and daily exercise, but it's incorrect when they oppose conversion therapy. To me, the logic is the same. If it's healthy, it's healthy. If it's unhealthy, it's unhealthy. Conversion therapy, the consensus is in, it is dangerous, debunked, harmful, unhealthy. Those who have gone through reparative therapies speak of the medically unsound methods employed by these therapists and organizations, such as behavioral therapy, hormone therapy, surgery. These treatments include homophobic counseling, isolation, unnecessary medication, including hormone treatment, subliminal therapies designed to enforce feminine or masculine behavior, and desensitization therapies that teach a young person to associate homosexual feelings with disgusting images. These forms of treatment frequently result in nervous breakdowns, feelings of guilt. Some patients have witnessed others in their programs commit suicide or mutilate their genitals. Many reparative tactics are likely to cause mental breakdowns in otherwise healthy people. Opponents of this bill may raise concerns about the constitutionality of this bill in terms of free speech or religious freedom. I'm sympathetic to these concerns because there's been a lot of misinformation about this bill going around. I want you to understand 3 points about the scope and impact of this bill. Under this bill, medical professionals and lay people would not be able to advertise for the sale of or charge money for conversion therapy, regardless of the patient's age. Next, medical professionals would be able to perform conversion therapy for patients over the age of 18 if they do not charge for it. This means that those who are not medical professionals, including faith leaders, would be able to provide conversion therapy to any individual, regardless of age, so long as they do not charge for the service. Nothing in this bill will prevent faith leaders from preaching what they believe about gender issues, nor will it criminalize speech based on religious viewpoints. It will simply prevent them from making a buck off of it. In other words, people are still free to disapprove of their gay children, but they cannot pay a therapist to tell their children that. The language of these bills was carefully crafted with the advice of many attorneys who specialize in civil liberties and First Amendment issues to ensure that no freedom of religion or speech issues would occur. I also had political leaders from many other states where this bill has passed review the language. Similar pieces of legislation from other states have been upheld in the federal appeals courts over the last few years. The Supreme Court of the United States has declined to hear challenges about the legality of these bans, which signals agreement with the appeals courts that such bans do not violate First Amendment guarantee to freedom of speech and religion. My colleagues, there's no evidence that shows people can change their gender identity or sexual orientation. You can't cure homosexuality. You will hear extensive personal testimony today from people who have experienced detrimental effects from conversion therapy personally, especially as children. This is harm. This is not what our medical practitioners are meant to do. We must hold our medical community to the highest standards and to provide their patients with the best quality care science can offer. Conversion therapy is not that care, and it should not be advertised as such. Being LGBT is not an abnormality. It is not something to be treated or fixed. This is based on pseudoscientific beliefs. It's based on prejudice. I'm not bringing a bill that says you can't be prejudiced. Nothing in this bill says that you can't hate people or think that they're going to hell. But no one should be making a buck off that. especially to the detriment of youth in Nebraska. Members of the committee, I urge you to make a decision informed by the mounting evidence discrediting this practice and move this bill forward. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Senator Slama has a question for you.
Hi, thank you very much for being here today and bringing these bills. I had just a few questions for you. So the conversion therapy statutes that you referenced in your opening, nationwide, those only extend to conversion therapy bans for minors under the age of 18. Why did you go beyond that in this bill to include any for-profit conversion therapy, even for consenting adults?
Conversion therapy is ineffectual and harmful. It's a debunked medical practice, and this bill regulates only that professional therapy, which is a form of medical treatment, which is already highly regulated to protect the public safety, that this not be a valid form of therapy. And that's just good science, that's just good medicine.
And so, just to be clear, this one, LB 167, does it apply to all forms of therapy, so including like group conversations with a therapist or one-on-one conversations?
In no form of therapy would a therapist be able to change somebody's sexual orientation. So a person could not go into a therapist and the therapist advertising or helping them change their orientation. There is a provision in the bill, and nothing in the bill prevents someone from giving compassionate care about someone's potentially negative feelings about same-sex attraction. Before I came out, when I was a teenager, I struggled very much with those feelings. I felt very abnormal. I felt very unaccepted. And there were definitely days when I wished I wasn't that way. And a good therapist will help a child or any person deal with those feelings in a supportive, loving, non-judgmental way. If a therapist is promising a person that they can change their sexual orientation, then that therapist should not have a license to practice, because that is not understood today as good medical practice.
So, to this end, have there been any complaints filed with DHHS or any other reporting agency in Nebraska about these conversion therapy practices in the last few years?
I'm going to let some of the testifiers behind me address that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no other questions. Thank you, Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Senator.
We will take proponent testimony at this time.
Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here. My name is Matthew Mims, M-A-T-T-H-E-W-M-I-M-S. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Counseling Association, and I'm speaking here on their behalf. I'm also a trained teacher, K through 12, a trained school counselor, K through 12, a licensed professional counselor, and a licensed mental health professional. I'm a full-time counselor educator for the University of Nebraska at Kearney, though I do not represent the university, their staff, or any of their voices. I'm here today to speak for the children and for the protection that we need to offer them against this practice. Conversion therapy is not effective, it's not efficient, and that has been proven by research, as well as there's detriment to the individual, as well as often relationships with other adults, their peers, and their parents. Conversion therapy can become sheer torture. The examples that Dr. Hunt gave and the description she gave was quite eloquent for this harmful practice. Because we have shock therapy, we're finding that it is effective for depression. Yet shock therapy to your genitals, just the thought of that probably makes some people cringe in this room. It certainly won't make a 30-second clip on the news, but it's something that we need to talk about because we need to have these protections in place. We believe that our society has developed beyond this. There's ethnic cultures that, for example, have female genital mutilation. And for a time, they thought this therapy would work about conversion from parents that were homophobic or thought they would be shunned in society. But we know that is not the place. We know that's not the outcome. And yet you would ask why the parents would do this. And I'll let some of my peers as well as some of the individuals testify to that, so I'm not repetitive. But we need to realize that sometimes parents do mistreat their own, and we need to have these protections against them. As we have outdated a lot of medical procedures, as we become more familiar with the body and now begin to understand working of the brains. Think about you as a child, really to go on to talk about some of these things, and yet have somebody so negative against what you were feeling inside. When you see some of the people that speak against this, ask them what their licensure is, what their training is. Did they get training in conversion therapy? Was it even with children? When you speak to some of the lobbyists, I hope they brought a counselor or social worker along with them, because I know of no one that is a licensed professional counselor who practices this and is out in this. In a way, this isn't a dark corner of the mental health profession. And many states are working towards this or have already been successful in eliminating this process. The American Counseling Association has a white paper speaking against this. There's a number of research to back this up. We'll have a representative from APA, so I'll close it. Any questions?
Senator Chambers.
Did you mention the application of shocks or electrical shock to genitals?
I did.
That's torture, and it cannot be done without violating international law or laws of war and things of that fashion. So I think if anybody applies that to a child, that person should be charged with a crime, prosecuted, and punished if found guilty. There cannot be a concept in this society of a proprietary ownership of a child like you would a piece of wood, a car, or some other inanimate object, because if you did that to an animal, it would be considered cruelty to animals and you could be prosecuted for it. And although anything not a plant or a mineral may be considered an animal, I mean animal in the sense of the lower order or the animal kingdom, and I think most people know what I'm talking about. And the reason I'm saying it to you, you are a person with training, you understand what it is we're talking about, and I want my view clearly on the record, because I'm not going to interrogate these people who support these kinds of things, because there are people in my community who might believe in exorcising spirits by doing very harmful things to children, and you cannot find a harsher critic of it than I. Children are not things. They cannot defend themselves. They cannot protect themselves, and it proves these nutty people who do that, I think they're insane. I want them to know it. If they read anything that George Bernard Shaw said, they should read the statement where he said parents are the very ones who should not have children. And when I say what I'm saying, we've had bills that talk about crimes and punishments. I don't care if they do it under the guise of religion or any other thing. I am glad that there are people here with understanding who are going to help us compile a record on this. And if anybody doesn't like what I say, well, I'm an easy person to find someplace else.
Totally agree with you, Senator Chambers. Is a lot of the tactics or techniques in conversion therapy does borderline on torture. And that's why I felt it was important to spend the day with you and speak speak in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate your testimony today.
Hey, my name is Rosemary Essex, Rosemary. I'm a licensed psychologist. The Essex, ESS. I'm a licensed psychologist speaking on behalf of the Nebraska Psychological Association in support of LB 167. The American Psychological Association, along with the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and essentially every major organization of healthcare professionals, opposes the practice of therapies intended to change sexual orientation from gay, lesbian, or bisexual to heterosexual because such therapies are not needed. There's no credible evidence that they work, and there's a significant potential that they could cause harm. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association, due to mounting research evidence that having a same-gender sexual orientation is not inherently pathological, decreed that homosexuality is not a mental illness. While gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals are more likely than heterosexuals to suffer from depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide, a significant body of research indicates that these mental health issues are directly caused by the discrimination that LGBT individuals face in society, not their sexual orientations. To further support this point, a growing body of research indicates that when communities are accepting and supportive of LGBT individuals, they are not more likely to experience mental health issues than their heterosexual neighbors. In 2009, the American Psychological Association, after conducting a comprehensive literature review, concluded that there is little evidence that therapies attempting to change sexual orientation can be successful. This is not surprising, given that decades of research have suggested that sexual orientation, like handedness, is not a characteristic that can be altered therapeutically. A former student of mine who'd been forced into this type of therapy by his parents remarked that it is very frustrating to attempt to do something that cannot be done. Our final concern is that therapies designed to change sexual orientation are likely to cause harm to participants. Being required to change one's sexual orientation communicates that this aspect of the self is undesirable, which logically could lead to self-hatred, depression, and suicide. In addition, such therapies often include inaccurate and very pejorative information about sexual orientation. My former student asserted that by being forced into this type of treatment, he felt rejected and negatively judged by his parents and his community, feelings that only deepened when he failed at the treatment. Initially, we had a concern about the bill potentially listing as, or decreeing that efforts to change gender identity in young children could be child abuse, because the research just isn't clear. There is some evidence evidently that young children might be able to change their gender identity, but since the bill clearly since 168 is no longer on the table, and since this bill does not criminalize that but would just make it something that couldn't be reimbursed, I don't think we would have a concern about that anymore. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Senator Slama.
Thank you for coming out today. I just had a question about the definition of conversion therapy in this bill as it's listed. It means practices or treatments that seek to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings towards individuals of the same gender. So, from your professional opinion, if somebody comes in as a sex addict and they are homosexual, would that line, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings towards individuals of the same genders, be in conflict with the treatment you would provide to it?
Well, sexual addiction is not recognized as a sexual disorder. If somebody felt that they were engaging in, if they weren't comfortable with their sexual behavior, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, we would work with them to help them meet their goals for changing their behavior. But as a licensed professional who ascribes to my professional code of ethics of doing no harm, I could not perform a therapy with somebody that I know has a high possibility of creating harm, or I could be at risk of losing my license, let alone not being able to sleep at night.
Would the same be true if somebody had a pornography addiction?
Again, I see those as very different things. We also do not recognize pornography as an addiction. We're always willing to work with people on behavioral issues if their targets, if the behavior change that they want to make is something we think we can help them with. You know, we have mortgages and student loans. If we think somebody has a genuine therapeutic need, we're more than happy to help them with it and get insurance reimbursement. But we are, again, if we do a treatment that we think has a high risk of harm and there's no cause for it, there's no reason to think it's efficacious, that would be consistent with malpractice.
But if their goal is the goal that you're helping them work towards is reducing that sexual attraction towards another individual of the same gender, that would be in violation of the statute, right?
Yes, and it's not a treatment that I would perform because of the reasons I've listed, that I don't have reason to think it can be successful and it might be harmful to them.
Senator Chambers.
What is the meaning of sadism?
A sadist is someone who achieves, they find it sexually pleasurable to watch somebody else suffer, whether it's they're causing physical harm or whether they're humiliating the other person, they find that sexually arousing.
That's all I have.
I have a question. You know,
Yes, sir.
we're taking this topic up, but we haven't really defined what this looks like. So is this just something that happens in a counselor's office? Or is that what we're talking about when we talk about conversion therapy, some kind of a counseling that takes place?
There are various ways to do it, and of course, I haven't performed it myself since I was 4 years old when EPA said that, you know, homosexuality is not a mental illness. There are residential programs, evidently, that do this. This is done as a group therapy. Historically, it has been done by, and as far as I know, currently it has been done by things like electric shocks. But because since 1973, the healthcare community has decreed that this is not a valid practice, it currently would likely be something that's done in the shadows, and therefore we don't have good information. Recent studies on this are poor quality. They're not published in peer-reviewed journals, so it's very hard to determine anything.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Welcome to the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Jay Irwin, Jayirwin, and I reside in Legislative District 12. I'm testifying in support of LB 167. I'm an associate professor of sociology at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and my PhD is in medical sociology. The bulk of my research is in the area of LGBTQ plus health, well-being, and identities. My testimony today reflects my professional expertise. It is not an indication of any official position of the Nebraska University System, UNO, Ralston Public Schools, or the Nebraska Association of School Boards, all of which I am affiliated. In 2010, my colleagues and I in the Nebraska Midland Sexual Health Research Collaborative, a UNO-based research team, collected some of the first data on LGBTQ plus individuals living across the state of Nebraska. We found considerable disparities, including high rates of depressive symptoms, suicidal ideation and suicide attempts, and a sample of LGBTQ plus adults. While this research did not directly ask participants about their experiences with conversion therapy, the best predictor of mental health in this study is a social environment that supported people's identities as it relates to their gender or sexuality. Conversion therapy is not in line with supporting people's authentic selves. You can send a powerful message to the LGBTQ plus community in Nebraska by passing LB 167 and showing them that this body believes that their identities are valid and thereby reduce stigma that conversion therapy maintains. Conversion therapy, has been said and will probably be said again, is an unethical and flawed attempt at convincing someone that their sexuality and or gender identity is wrong and can be changed. It is based in pseudoscience and has been discredited by every major nonpartisan medical and mental health professional organization. All major medical and mental health organization agrees that a person's sexuality and gender are immutable and cannot be changed. Conversion therapy relies on shaming LGBTQ plus individuals, resulting in considerable mental health damage, including depression, anxiety, and suicidal behaviors. Conversion therapy can also impact people's physical health, as it can cause massive amounts of stress on the body that can in turn impact cardiovascular functioning. 15 states, the District of Columbia, and several local municipalities have already banned conversion therapy. Let us join them in clearly stating that conversion therapy is an approach that has no place in Nebraska, and let us uphold our motto of equality before the law. Thank you for your time today and for your careful consideration of these bills.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate your testimony today and everyone's patience as we get past 6 o'clock. Welcome.
Hello. I'm Dr. Joan Doughton, JoanDaughton. I'm a physician, specifically a child and adolescent psychiatrist, practicing at Children's Hospital and Medical Center. I'm here today on behalf of the Nebraska chapter of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry The president of our regional council, Dr. Kayla Pope, also submitted a letter of support for LB 167. We want to thank Senator Hunt for offering this bill. I want to remind you of the medical organizations which have policy statements regarding not only their lack of support for conversion therapy, but also their concerns about its negative effects. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the Pan American Health Organization Regional Office of the World Health Organization. This bill is specific to professionals with licenses. It does not address lay counselors or parents in any way. Conversion or reparative therapies rely on the false premise that homosexuality or gender-diverse identities are pathological. Variations in sexual orientation and gender expression are normal components of human development. They are not pathological. There is also no scientific evidence that change in one's sexual orientation or gender identity is even possible. While there's no evidence to support the validity of conversion therapies, there is evidence to show these therapies increase the risk of causing or worsening mental health conditions. When sexual orientation or gender identity fails to change during conversion therapy, because it inevitably will fail, often self-esteem is undermined, shame and guilt are increased, and internalized homophobia and transphobia is intensified. Nebraskans deserve accurate information on sexual orientation and gender identity. They deserve increased family, school, and community support and reduced rejection of sexual minorities. Healthy development for sexually and gender diverse Nebraskans should promote integration of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression into their overall identity without any imposed or predetermined outcome. Happy to take questions.
Senator Pansy Brooks.
Thank you. Sorry, these things. There, can you hear me?
Yes.
People have said you can't hear anything on TV, so there. So I'm wondering, Dr. Doughton, if you have had patients that have undergone conversion therapy.
I've not had any, but I have several patients who are within the LGBTQ population, and the American Academy of Child Psychiatry really encourages us to assist them and support them on their journey. I cannot determine if somebody is heterosexual, homosexual, female, or male. We have to help them figure out that journey on their own and be supportive so that mental health issues are kept at a minimum.
Thank you.
I see no other questions. Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your testimony. Next testifier.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Marianne Williams, Marrianne Williams. Do I need to spell it? Williams. I'm here this evening as a Christian to show the other side of Christianity and religion. As a lifelong Christian and a member of the Episcopal Church, I'm saddened and really tired of radical right-wing Christian groups making a mockery of my religion. The views of many expressed here today is in opposition to the LGBTQ rights are not mainstream Christian views. In 1976, both the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops voted for a fully inclusive Episcopal Church, stating homosexual persons are children of God, who have full and equal claim with all of their persons upon love, acceptance, and pastoral concern and care of the Church. Canon law includes gender identity or expression in its list of persons who are assured full access to the ministry of the Church. Furthermore, the Episcopal Church urges dioceses, parishes, and Episcopalians to advocate for passage and enactment of similar legislation of the local and state level. Also, currently the Church of England, the Anglican Church, is, as the head of the Episcopal Church right now, working worldwide to ban conversion therapy. So the Lutheran Church is very similar. The ECLH portion of the Lutheran Church, they say that gay and lesbian people are individuals created by God, and are welcome to participate fully in the life of congregations of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. They also encourage their parishioners to support laws that protect the rights of the LGBTQ community. The Presbyterian Church goes even farther. They acknowledge that the misuse of the term religious freedom in denying basic human rights, and reaffirms that faith and religious liberty cannot be used to discriminate against anyone because of who they are. Mainstream Christianity does not condone conversion therapy because they do not consider homosexuality an illness. Christian sects that embrace conversion therapy are radical and are not practicing within the tenets of the Christian faith. More and more Christian churches are placing more emphasis on the teachings of the New Testament, and which is actually the teachings of Christ, which embraces inclusivity and love with all fellow human beings.
Very good.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. I wish we had time to give everybody 10 minutes, and it's just not practical tonight, I'm afraid. But thank you for your testimony, just the same. Good evening.
Good evening. I was going to say good afternoon. I guess it's evening. My name is Andrew Alleman, ANDREWALEMAN. I reside in the Legislative District 9, and I'm testifying in support of LB 167. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today, as it's not often that queer and trans Black people or people of color have an opportunity to be heard. I'm a clinical social worker with over 9 years of professional experience working with and supporting LGBTQ individuals, with 3 of those specifically in a clinical setting. I've had the opportunity to see firsthand the impact of a supportive, affirming, and client-directed environment can have on a young person, including confidence, stronger school performance, success in the workplace, and lower rates of depression and anxiety. Take a second to think of an identity that is something that's very important to you, one that's an essential part of who you are. Now imagine that when sharing aspects of this identity, you are told that this identity does not exist, you are not valid in a society if you hold that identity, and in order to truly be successful, you must shed that identity. How would you feel? This is why I'm here today to ask you to support LB 167. You see, for me, this piece of legislation is just common sense. As you've heard, all major mental health organizations have spoken in opposition to conversion therapy, citing the several studies which have shown this form of therapy can lead to increased depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. As a clinician, it's extremely important to me that I align with my profession's ethical and evidence-based standards and practices. I can't imagine someone who would want to see a surgeon who does not follow evidence-based practices and whom does not align with the ethical standards of their own profession. Why should this be any different for mental health practitioners? It is irresponsible, inhumane, and detrimental to the success of children and young adults if we knowingly and willingly expose them to the form of medical treatment which we are fully aware can cause adverse effect on their health and well-being. Each of you today have the opportunity to take a step forward to ensure the safety and well-being for Nebraska children and young adults. I'm going to leave you with a quote today from one of my former clients. I'm just so tired of having to convince everyone that I am who I am. I don't know that I can do it anymore. Thank you.
Senator Slama.
Hi, thank you for coming out today and for your work. I mean, in your 9 years of experience, how many LGBTQ plus kids have you worked with that have experienced this form of conversion therapy that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I can't say that I've had a client that specifically has had experienced conversion therapy. What I will say is non-affirming environments they have experienced and non-affirming therapists they've experienced, which has increased their depression and anxiety.
See no other questions. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. To our next testifier, good evening.
Good evening. Chairman Lathrop and esteemed members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Adam Whitty, that is ADAMWITTE, and I've lived in Omaha since 1992. I come to you as a survivor of conversion therapy here in Nebraska to speak in support of LB 167 for two main reasons. First, conversion therapy ranges from damaging to barbaric, and second, it is ineffectual. I sought this treatment myself beginning in the summer of 1998 when I was 16 years of age and terrified of disappointing or angering my parents and church community by coming out as gay. My earnestness and genuine fear of discovery must have won over the receptionist at the treatment facility because she waived the parental authorization form so I could proceed. Afraid of my parents asking questions about my afternoon activities, I scheduled my sessions in the facility's overnight hours. So, while many high school students will admit to having sneaked out of their houses to cause trouble, I did so twice a week to subject myself to electric shock aversion therapy. This went on for a little over 15 months. The shocks administered in response to visual stimuli began as barely noticeable, like receiving a mild static shock from a doorknob, but the treatment, however, was progressive, with shocks increasing in intensity as the process continued from week to week and month to month. On the night of what would become my last session in 1999, the final shock was so strong I was briefly knocked unconscious. I apologize for the somewhat graphic imagery that follows, but when I awoke, I discovered that I had bitten a substantial chunk out of my tongue and was bleeding profusely. It was at that point that I realized the treatment would never work. It had reached a level where I worried for my safety, yet I didn't feel any less same-sex attraction, just more concomitant fear and shame. If those two emotions could ever have been enough to change my orientation, I wouldn't have needed to seek conversion therapy in the first place. While my circumstances and specific experiences may be different from others, my outcome is not. Having met and contacted many other people who have also gone through some form of conversion therapy, I have yet to encounter anyone whose orientation has been changed. And you've already heard from professionals about all of the groups that have disavowed this therapy as a practice. So I will leave that part out. You've heard it from experts already. If conversion therapy in any of its forms actually did what it is purported to do in a humane way, I would be here advocating for its continued existence and people being able to charge for it despite my personal moral objections to the idea of it. However, it's not just harmful, it also doesn't produce results. It's too late to save 16-year-old me from embarking on that trip through hell with nothing to show for it but scars, but I hope that you will support LB 167 so another generation of Nebraskans doesn't have to endure it. Thanks for your time.
Senator Chambers.
My colleagues know that I have a penchant for rhyming words, and I would call this perversion instead of conversion, and I wouldn't call it therapy, and I don't use the kind of language that it would take to adequately describe it, but I appreciate the fact you were willing to come here, tell what you experienced, and that takes it out of the realm of the theoretical, hypothetical, and speculative.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks for coming here. We appreciate you taking the time to share your experience. Next testifier. Good evening. Welcome to your Judiciary Committee.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Matthew Shurka. That's Mathew, single T, Matthew Shurka, Shurka. I wanted to start by addressing Senator Salma's question. There's some clarity between the distinction of addiction versus attraction in the mental health community, there is no correlation. The question suggests that in order to reduce addiction, you would reduce attraction. For example, if there was a heterosexual male having sexual addiction with female, the solution would be to make his attraction to females less. There's no correlation between the two, and it's very important that the public understands what addiction is and what attraction is. At the age of 16, I came out to my father about my same-sex attractions and that I'm a gay man. My father accepted me with open arms and told me that he loved me no matter what. My father feared what that meant, that his only son would be gay, and how my life would turn out with a job, career, our family. And I began conversion therapy for 5 years. My first therapy session, which was all through talk therapy, was explained that all same-sex attractions are rooted in childhood trauma. Fortunately, I had a great upbringing. My parents, I would say, did a great job. But because I have 2 older sisters and I'm the only male, I was diagnosed with having too many females in my environment. I was not allowed to speak to my mother and 2 sisters for 3 years. In that time and during that separation, I learned to defeminize my behaviors, and I had to understand that my males are my peers, not my attraction, and to conquer females in a mysterious way, as my therapist would describe, as someone I will seduce and attract. I strongly believe that therapy was working. I had made more male friends. I had girlfriends that I engaged with sexually, and I believed I was living a heterosexual life. Of course, my attraction to the same sex never diminished in any way, and my depression, suicidal ideation for 2 years continued, and coming from a conservative family, conversion therapy had broken my family apart. My parents didn't kick me out of my home. My father wanted what he believed would be the best life for me. So becoming estranged to my entire family at 21, finding myself having to take that courageous step to actually leave conversion therapy, and for the first time in my life actually experience what a mental health professional does. My only experience was conversion therapy by a licensed professional. I'm 30 years old. I'm the co-founder of the Born Perfect campaign, which is a national effort to protect all LGBT youth from conversion therapy. Our study with the UCLA Williams Institute shows that nearly 700,000 people in the U.S. today have experienced conversion therapy. 365,000 of those 700,000 people experienced as a minor. Our estimates show that up to 70,000 teenagers will experience it in the next 5 years. With 15 states passed and the great state of Nebraska to become the next state, I can get that number as close to 0 as possible, protecting all LGBT youth in this country. I know my time is up. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Mr. Shirka. I don't see any questions for you. Appreciate you coming down tonight, sharing your experience. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, committee members. 21 years later, and I am still suffering from the effects of conversion therapy.
Sure. Let's have you start with your name.
My name is My name is Aaron Opperle, AARON, and I am a survivor of this inhumane practice. One of the things I struggle with today as a result of this so-called therapy is called arrested emotional development. This is defined as the inability to mentally and emotionally develop past a certain age because of mental and emotional abuse. Since my time in conversion therapy, I still feel a need to ask for validation in every decision that I make, because I desperately need approval from not only my family, but also my peers. As a child, I had a verbally abusive father. When I was 15 years old, I remember my father saying 2 phrases that should have never been uttered from a parent. Quote, "I wish you were never born," or even a phrase more troubling for me, "You'll never amount to anything." Every single day, I have to combat these phrases. When I was 18, my father passed away of cancer, but before he did, I mustered up the courage to forgive him. He told me he would have 15 sons like me just one day before his passing. 1 year later, I went to Love in Action, the most popular conversion therapy program at the time. This program aimed to fix people of their sexual sins, so I thought it could help. However, Love in Action only perpetuated and amplified the hatred that I already had for myself, as well as extenuated the verbal abuse from my father. It was this belief that I would never be good enough, so long as I stayed gay. When I was in Love in Action, they staged a mock funeral for me in which they shamed me for having an affair with a man from work. According to the leader, I had a history of destructive behavior. As I laid on the table with my eyes closed, other clients approached and expressed eulogies of anger, shame, or disappointment. I was told after the funeral that if I returned home, I would most certainly die. And if I decided to attend a gay-affirming church, that I would be creating my own brand of religion so that I could be accepted by God. It amazes me to this day that suicide was never an option for me. It has ruined my relationship with God or any higher power. I have been seeing a therapist to combat depression, mild to moderate PTSD, self-hatred, and addiction that I still deal with today. I'll conclude with an excerpt from my friend's book, Boy Erased by Garrett Clanley, that explains the collapse of my faith and so many of my friends who went through this psychological torture. Quote, "And God. I will not call on God at any point during this decade-long struggle, not because I want to keep God out of my life, but because his voice is no longer there. What happened to me has made it impossible to speak with God, to believe in a version of him that isn't charged with self-loathing. My ex-gay therapist took him away from me, and no matter how many different churches I attend, I will feel the pang of a deep love now absent from my life. Perhaps one day I will hear his voice again, perhaps not. It's a sadness I deal with on a daily basis. Thank you."
Thank you, Aaron. Senator Pansy Brooks.
Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Opperly. Is it Opperly?
Opperly.
Yeah. First off, I think that we're all grateful that you were born. Number two, what you said that you'll never amount to anything, and look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
How you're making a difference in changing the world
Thank
for
you.
good and for love. So that we all need to acknowledge and celebrate. So thank you for that. Also, are you a young man who was featured in a film named
Yes.
called Boy Erased?
Yes. It is my character. I had met the writer of the film just a few months ago, so the film had already been made, but he had heard about my mock funeral. So my character is very loosely based. Whatever happens in the film didn't happen to me, because they take a physical abuse approach to my mock funeral. But I'm okay with that, because it covered the whole spectrum of conversion therapy. My outcome of my character isn't good either. But
No, but it is, and thankfully that is not the actual outcome of you. And everyone should see that very mainstream movie. It's a very powerful movie, and I'm grateful that a part of your story is included, and that we are all privileged to meet you and the other really wonderful people with the courage to come forward. I don't know how you do it, but we are so grateful and so moved by your strength and courage to tell these stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Here. Good evening.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and members of the committee. My name is James Pennington, James Pennington. I'm here as an expert in the field of mental health counseling, and have been practicing for the past 5 years as a trauma therapist, specializing in working with members of the LGBTQ+ community. I frequently present at conferences and work as a consultant to help train other clinicians on how to work more competently and effectively with members of the queer community. Today I'm testifying in a supportive capacity for Bill 167, which would prohibit the practice of conversion therapy in the state of Nebraska. Conversion therapy is broadly defined as a therapeutic practice whose goal is to change an individual's gender identity or sexual orientation. It is currently banned in 15 states as well as the District of Columbia due to the damaging effects it has been shown to have on the mental health of individuals who experience it. In addition to being legally banned in 15 states, a significant number of medical associations have made official statements condemning the practice as harmful and unsupported by research. People before me have listed some of those. I won't repeat them for interest of time. The extensive list of clinicians and associations coming forward to make statements about the damaging effects of conversion therapy should underscore the necessity of preventing it from being practiced in Nebraska. Individuals who have experienced conversion therapy report lasting effects of anxiety, depression, and self-destructive behavior. Research indicates that family acceptance of a youth's sexual orientation is one of the strongest protective factors against negative outcomes. Youth with unsupportive families are 8.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 5.9 times more likely to report high levels of depression, and are 3.4 times more likely to have used illegal drugs than their peers reporting higher levels of family support. I have personally worked with several individuals who have been forced to see therapists whose stated goal was to change my client's gender identity or sexual orientation, and I have witnessed firsthand the lasting harm it did to my client's mental health. My clients experienced significant anxiety and depression as a result of the efforts to change their gender identity or sexual orientation, and several had attempted suicide multiple times. They reported that the experiences left them feeling broken, flawed, and unloved. A practice with these effects has no place in a profession devoted to improving the mental health and stability of our clients' lives, and I implore you to support these bills that are working to safeguard our children from these reprehensible practices.
Thank you, Mr. Pennington. We appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Britt Gunther Lehman, BritGuntherLehman. I'm here as an expert in the field of psychology and mental health and will be representing my own business, Brave Resilience Counseling. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in community counseling. I'm a licensed independent mental health practitioner and practice out of Omaha and Bellevue, providing services primarily to the transgender community. I'm also the founder of Transformative, a social support group for transgender and non-binary adults, and today I'm testifying in support of LB 167. The fact that conversion therapy remains legal in our state is appalling to me. Not only does conversion therapy violate many of the professional codes of ethics governing the practices of mental health clinicians, but it's psychological abuse. While research on the effectiveness of conversion therapy is limited by the constraints of quantifying sexual orientation, many studies have shown that it is not effective in changing sexual orientation or gender identity, and further that it's extremely harmful. This practice is outdated, unsupported by research, and steeped in the very shame and guilt that keep people from receiving appropriate mental health services. Unfortunately, one of the most challenging cases that I've ever encountered as a therapist was while working with an individual who had survived conversion therapy. This person rejected their sexual orientation and gender identity following conversion therapy that was mandated by their parents. As an adult, they acknowledged that efforts to change their identity were not helpful and largely detrimental to them. To cope with the pain of conflicting feelings of who they were versus who their family would accept, they started using methamphetamine and other substances. This individual experienced frequent suicidal ideation, uncontrollable urges to use substances, disturbances in personality, and difficulty forming intimate relationships. We worked for months building trust and discussing their needs to be validated, even before we could even get to the trauma. Unfortunately, this individual relapsed on substances and did not return to therapy. This story is not uncommon for clinicians who work with the LGBTQ community in Nebraska. The practice of conversion therapy is far more prevalent than what is acknowledged by the general public and even by some clinicians. I myself have been addressed in professional environments by other licensed clinicians who told me that transgender people exist exclusively as the result of child sexual abuse. Not only is this false and unfounded by research, but it's a harmful approach to adopt as a helping professional. Clinicians who practice with the belief that their clients' identities are resultant of horrific trauma are sending messages to their clients that there's something wrong with them and that their identity is not valid. Imagine the shame and guilt that you would feel experiencing your own sexual or gender identity and having someone tell you that the only reason you identify this way is because of something that should happen to no one. Imagine the impact that this would have on the developing mind of a child or adolescent who is exploring their gender or sexuality for the first time. Sadly, this is the reality for those who have experienced conversion therapy. If we can prevent the availability of conversion therapy, we may be preventing numerous individuals from a life of self-hate, mental illness, addiction, and even death itself.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Hearing from the professionals. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Lathrop, members of the committee. My name is Scott Barker. It's Scottbarker, and I'm here to speak in favor of LB 167. I am a follower of Jesus, both personally and professionally. I am the Bishop of Nebraska for the Episcopal Church, serving thousands of church members in 53 worshiping communities across the entire state of Nebraska. I grew up here. I was educated in our public schools. This place is my home. I want you to know that from my vantage as a religious leader, this bill does not curtail religious freedom. If it did, I feel certain you would be unable to hear my voice today over the din from out in that gallery, and I would be at the front of the line to oppose it. I believe this bill's opponents have disingenuously suggested that the bill compromises that precious freedom in order to paralyze you from doing what is right. If this bill were to pass today, the doors of every church, synagogue, and mosque in Nebraska would be wide open this weekend. Every Nebraska citizen would still have the right to set up a soapbox on the corner and zealously preach the gospel. And critically to the issues before you, faith leaders and parents would still be able to preach and teach whatever their religious tradition teaches about human sexuality. Should this bill pass, every Nebraskan will still have the right to go find a counselor from their own faith tradition if they wish, and to work out the tender and sometimes complex questions of how to apply what their faith community teaches to their own lives and actions. What passage of this bill will prevent is advertising for and charging money to attempt conversion therapy, and you have heard how that is a debunked and predatory practice that is harmful to human beings. LB 167 is not about curtailing religious freedom. It is about regulating a business. And that is a job that we count on all of you to do. I believe human sexuality, including sexual orientation and gender identity, is a precious gift that God has planted in every human being, and it's surely part of what it means to be created in God's image. I have an abiding interest as a disciple of Christ to help people come to know and appreciate that gift and to order their lives in a way that is loving and faithful and moral. I cherish that work and the freedom to do it well. This bill will not take that away from me or any other pastor. I respect my fellow believers who will speak against this bill, but they are not being truthful in framing this debate as an issue of religious freedom. Where religion applies to this matter is right here. Jesus commands us to love and protect the vulnerable and to see that we do no harm to our neighbors. That's what LB 167 will help accomplish, and I urge you to move it forward from this committee to a vote by the full unicameral. And with my 2 seconds left, I want to say what a privilege it has been to listen to the LGBT community here today and to be given a place in their line. I thank you.
Bishop, thank you very much for being here today. Very much. We appreciate your thoughts, your convictions. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Swanson, SUZANNE-SWANSON. You can call me Suze. I've had that name since high school and it works. Good evening, Chairperson Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. I apologize, Lathrop. I am testifying in support of LB 167, and I am asking that you support Megan Hunt's bill. And when I originally wrote this was under the impression it would ban conversion therapy, which I found out was not to be true. But I am asking that you do support this bill. And have you have heard from other organizations that it has been deemed ineffective by numerous medical associations. So I will not repeat that. But however, in the email I did say to you, I did list 43 organizations that have either been medical, professionally aligned, or in the LGBT community who have spoken out against conversion therapy. Why should we force someone to change because we don't approve of who they are? I often question why families have exiled their own children because of their sexual orientation. I'm sorry, but if they truly love their child as they claim, then they would accept them for who they are. What conversion therapy does is it tries to fit a square into a peg hole. That won't work. You can't change someone's sexual preference. These children have enough stress in their lives. There is no reason to add any more. They are already struggling to find their place in the world, struggling to find friends and feeling like they belong, and possibly mental health issues. We have shown that the research has been exposing children has done much more detrimental effects, and we have covered how it increases their risk of depression, suicidality, lower life satisfaction, less social support, and lower social and economic status in young adulthood. I firmly believe that a lot of people who have been forced into this therapy have developed PTSD. And you know that PTSD has taken multiple tolls on people's lives. And it can range from interpersonal relationships to the professional. However, the trauma can take years of therapy to process and heal from it. But the people who have been traumatized by conversion therapy and other therapy in the past are less likely to receive help in the future because they don't want to relive the trauma, or they are afraid they will be subjected to worse trauma and stigmatization. Therapy is supposed to help make people better, not worse. As a resident of Nebraska, I've noticed we are very behind in the times. By banning conversion therapy, you are bringing the state up to date and joining the other 16 states that have done so. These bills are vital for the LGBTQI community. They are humans just like you and me. They deserve to be treated as such and not second-class citizens, outcasts, or like lab rats and doing such harmful therapy. I understand this as an issue as an ally because I've been diagnosed as on the autism spectrum with Asperger's. I have struggle to fit in, feel like I belong, and my social skills are horrible. But at the same time, I'm here to speak out in support for this bill today. Because of this bill, I feel like the LGBTQI plus community will benefit from this. Thank you.
Suze, you did a good job.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thanks for being here today.
Good.
No, I know you were nervous. Yeah, thanks for being here. Next supporter.
Good evening. My name is Mark Van Kekerix, and I am so nervous right now.
Oh, you don't need to be nervous in front of this group.
My name is spelled MarkVanKekerix. I'm a lifelong Nebraskan, and I was raised in Lincoln. I currently live in Omaha, and I'm thrilled to be represented by Senator Hunt, who introduced this bill. I'm going to cut some of this stuff out because it is repetitive, but I'm going to start with my story. When I was 15 years old, which admittedly was quite a few years ago, my parents sent me to a psychiatrist because I'd started acting out, which is what we called it then. This psychiatrist was the first person I ever came out to, but his reaction was to tell me that being gay was a sickness that I needed to avoid and overcome. I also came out to my school counselor, who told me to think carefully about whether being gay was the choice I wanted to make. The result was I didn't come out to my parents or anyone else. I shoved myself firmly back in the closet and tried to be straight. Got married to a woman, had a family, and denied my true orientation until I was 40 years old. During that time, I battled depression and addictive behaviors. My weight ballooned to over 500 pounds, and I faced unhappiness every day. In the late 1990s, after my marriage collapsed, I sought help from another counselor, this one, through a program affiliated with Exodus International. This one said he could help me overcome my same-sex attraction, that was his word. And I tried really hard. I didn't go into the details of what was in the therapy, but believe me, it was humiliating. I tried very hard, but I fell further and further into a deep, dark hole, and that's when I attempted suicide. Finally, after a lot of work with a really good therapist, 13 years ago, I came out, and my life has been infinitely better. I mentioned Exodus International earlier because I want to point out the fact that, according to Exodus, was a group formed in the 70s to promote conversion therapy. By their own data, the success rate of the therapy they promoted was less than 1%. Less than 1% success at changing a person's sexual orientation. This exodus essentially folded in 2012, and in 2013, its president, Alan Chambers, actually issued an apology stating that he was sorry for the pain and hurt that conversion therapy has caused. I wish that in the 1980s and 1990s I'd had this information that I have now. Maybe my life would have been different. But I urge you to support LB 167 so that the lives of the youth of Nebraska can be different. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. We appreciate you coming down tonight. Oh, pardon me.
Oh, it's fine.
Good evening.
Hello, my name is Tessa Faust, Tessa Faust. I'm a religious studies major at UNL and a peer minister at the Lutheran Center on campus. I identify as queer. I was afraid to come out for many years. I didn't come out until after high school when I graduated and started UNL a few years ago. Many of my friends in high school were afraid of what would happen if they came out. Luckily, and I use luckily in a weird loose term, the worst thing that happened to my friends is they got kicked out of their churches. They weren't allowed to worship anymore. I stopped going to church for many years. It wasn't until my friend hit me up and said, I want to go to this event on campus called Queerness and Christianity, will you join me? That I said, sure, I have nothing better to do. I joined, I listened, and I met a wonderful community on campus who accepts me the way I am, and not only that, loves me unconditionally. Now, growing up, my church never set its stance on LGBTQ issues, and I never asked because I think I knew the answer and I was afraid. My friends in high school, a lot of them didn't come out, a lot of them did, but the fear of conversion therapy loomed over us like a boogeyman. But unlike the boogeyman, this fear is real, as you've heard from many people here today. Some people here started conversion therapy the year I was born, 20 years old, and I don't want this to happen to people younger than me, to the high schoolers down at Lincoln High where I graduated. I don't want them to be sitting there afraid to be who they are. Another form of conversion therapy that, well, as I like to call it, it reminds me of, is mission schools in America's past. Now, if you don't know what mission schools are, it's a shameful history in America where they tried to kill the Indian, save the child. I myself am Native American. Just as they couldn't change someone's race, you can't change someone's sexual orientation or gender. You can't change my race any more than you can change how I love someone. It's not something that can be done. Please end this era of cruelty. We need to stop teaching children to hate themselves and lie to themselves. Thankfully, the counseling I've had in my lifetime has always been very positive and very much letting me figure out who I am instead of someone trying to yell at me and have me lie to myself and the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. Good evening.
Good evening, Senators. My name is Isabel Salas, Isabel-Salas, and I'm here today representing a friend of mine who couldn't be here. His name is Trevor Obermueller, and I'm representing him and his experience that he's brave enough to share with us today. Senators of the Nebraska Unicameral, my name is Trevor Obermueller. I'm in strong support of LB 167 to prohibit conversion therapy. I am a survivor of conversion therapy. I call myself a survivor because there are people I know who ended their life after going through conversion therapy. My church taught me from the age of 6 that being gay was a sin. Additionally, that it was a mental illness that could be treated. Under this dogma, I revealed that I had feelings of love towards men to my pastor. With the guidance of my pastor and my parents, I was ushered into conversion therapy to convert to a so-called healthier sexuality. In conversion therapy, they told me that my love for men was a disease, and this fictitious disease would lead to numerous real diseases. Jeffrey Satinover, an outspoken conversion therapist, told me that I would inevitably get AIDS, cancer, and other infections. If I loved a man, I would cause a schism in my family and break it. I was told that if I gave in, I would tear apart society by undermining institutions and contributing to its destruction. Because of these reasons, it was my obligation to change or repress myself. Conversion therapy was very secretive. If someone left or if they completed suicide, they would be condemned, and we would be told that they loved their sin too much and did not love God, but only themselves. Suicide was not encouraged, but the fact that LGBT people who go through conversion therapy have a much higher suicide rate is not a dysfunction of conversion therapy. Intentionally or not, the suicides are a function of conversion therapy. The goal of conversion therapy is to decrease and eliminate the number of LGBT people in the population. During conversion therapy, I was hurt by the actions of my therapist and by my parents. To survive in conversion therapy, I had to repress myself and be disingenuous with myself and my loved ones. I did this not to hurt or disappoint my family, but I ended up hurting and disappointing myself. My parents did think this was the best for me, but it unintentionally put me through abuse. I was hurt that they chose that for me. As a consequence of their choice, I have developed clinical anxiety and depression. I have wanted to kill myself many times because I felt I was disappointing my family, country, and God. While I was told not to kill myself, I was told it would be better if there were less gay people. Despite what I have been through, I have gone to real therapy to repair the trauma of conversion therapy. While the pain of conversion therapy may never fully dissipate, I hope to use my pain to ensure there are no more young Nebraskans that have to go through this damaging practice. As a teacher, I've seen firsthand what abuse and trauma can do to a child's life. They participate less in school and friends and feel seemingly endless pain and loneliness. It is our job as a community to defend our children and protect them from harm. Please vote in favor of LB 167. And I would just like to note, as I was reading this, I noted how ridiculous it seemed that I was reading it because our gender identities are switched, but I too am bisexual, and I would feel the same way if I had to go through this experience as Trevor has.
Thank you, and we appreciate you being here tonight. Good evening.
My name is Jonathan Peterson, JONATHAN PETERSEN. I live in Legislative District 46. I'd like to thank the committee for giving me an opportunity to speak. I'm here today in support of LB 167. I did a bit of research and compiled some facts and statistics, but we've already heard a lot of that from the experts, so I'll skip over it. I'm currently a student at the university, an active member of the Lincoln community, and hopefully within the next few years, a homeowner and a father. I've lived in Nebraska for close to 20 of my 26 years. As an elementary schooler, I thought Nebraska was amazing. I grew up in the heart of Nebraska's beautiful sandhills, and I knew all of the middle names of all of my classmates. At the time, I thought that it would be a wonderful place to stay forever. As a young adult, having seen a bit more of the world and its cruelties, I second-guessed this sentiment. I was an emerging progressive and newly discovering my queer identity. When I officially came out, I was ostracized from the church I had called home after they had tried for years to pray my affliction away. I slowly became more confident in who I was, but I found that more and more of my relationships crumbled. People I had once called friends and family no longer wanted to be associated with me because I was choosing to be true to myself. An example of this I added in is my grandmother once told me that no one would ever love me because I would be permanently stuck somewhere in between male and female. I was not subjected to conversion therapy per se. I never saw an official counselor or was sent to a camp. I mostly just experienced what I talked about with my church. Nonetheless, the comparatively mild amount of discrimination that I did face was enough to push me into a suicidal spiral in my early 20s. I don't like to imagine what would have happened to me if I had experienced conversion therapy, but I certainly don't think that I would have survived. During my post-attempt hospital stay, I resolved to leave Nebraska as soon as I finished school to find somewhere that would be friendlier to people like me. Now, several years later, I have found ways to blend in with the normal Nebraska crowd. I'm happily married, and because I don't always appear so visibly queer, it's easier for me to feel comfortable. However, when I think of raising my children in Nebraska, I am afraid. I could never justify exposing my children to the same hatred and discrimination that I faced. Until I know that my children will be safe and accepted in my home state, my wife and I will continue to search for alternative places to start a family. In the interest of keeping young Nebraskan families like mine here in our state, in the interest of protecting Nebraskan children, present and future, I ask you to support LB 167. No child should be forced to undergo the psychological warfare involved in conversion therapy or the emotional devastation it causes, which can last a lifetime. No child should be told that in order to be good enough, they must change a fundamental part of who they are. Please stand with me, with my family, and with open-hearted Nebraskans across the state in supporting LB 167. Help us send a clear message that this vicious maltreatment of innocents will not be tolerated in the state that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening.
Good evening to you, and thank you for your forbearance of all these long testimonies. My name is Julie Nichols, JulienNichols, and Senator Pansy Brooks is my senator. I'm in that district. I would like to thank Senator Hunt for introducing this bill and the others in order to protect LGBTQ persons. We have a lot of laws, and you know this, that were enacted to protect a particular group or a thing even. We protect our property through laws, children. These laws have been viewed as necessary to a civilized and fair society. Our country, however, sometimes fails. The absence of protective legislation opens the door to laws that persecute. We played a little fast and loose when we have cases in point, the purposeful infection of African American men in order to observe stages of syphilis, and also the involuntary sterilization of Latinx women. As Senator Chambers noted earlier, it would seem that conversion therapy is kind of a form of torture. What I'd like to talk about is, while we all enjoy the rights to ideological differences, ideologies in a free society are not what determine the law. Do you all know who Alan Turing is? Okay, no, maybe not. I didn't learn about him in school. He was a mathematician, computer scientist, cryptoanalyst, logician, now considered the father of theoretical computer science and artificial intelligence. No computerized device would exist without the foundational work of Alan Turing. In addition, his system of code breaking directly affected the outcome of World War II. Thus, we owe him our liberty. What kept Turing out of the history books? He was gay. While he gave us a free world and his genius persists, Turing was charged with gross indecency under a Victorian, in 1952, I believe, under a Victorian law that criminalized homosexuality. He pled guilty. Once he was convicted, he was given the choice of incarceration or probation, conditional on treatments to kill his libido, render him impotent, and dissuade him from homosexual behaviors. He chose probation. He received hormonal therapy that was administered by medical professionals, which, among other things, caused him to develop breasts. Turing's conviction stripped him of security clearance, banned him from further engaging in a career. His contributions ceased not only because of his conviction, but because he committed suicide 2 years later. He was 41 years old. Unable to pardon Turing because of his conviction, the Prime Minister of England apologized in 2011
by saying how deeply sorry I and we are all for what happened to him. On behalf of the British government and all those who freely live thanks to Alan's work, we're sorry. You deserve so much better. Our LGBTQ citizens deserve better too.
Okay.
He was punished by the existence of a
We have a lot of people behind you to testify. Ms. Nichols.
We want to make sure that the absence of a law does not result in this type of situation.
Thank you.
And thank you for your forbearance again.
Good evening. I'm back. Thanks for letting me chime in on this one as well. My name is Eli, E-L-I, Rigatuso, R-I-G-A-T-U-S-O. I live in Omaha, Nebraska. I am a native Nebraskan, and I am a transmasculine, queer, two-spirit of the Menominee Nation of Keshena, Wisconsin. I am here to testify in favor of LB 167 with my ancestors above my head. I'm going to be 54 years old this year. I was born in 1965 and knew at a very young age that I was unique. My mom used to call me her prophet. I knew in my heart I was something more than just a boy or just a girl, but when I attempted to have these conversations with my parents, it was met with extreme opposition. It was in the early 70s, and none of us even knew really what it was to be homosexual, let alone what it really was to be transgender or even know the word. My parents had no idea what to do to help me, so I was forced to hide who I am and attempt to live my life. I'm extremely grateful that they didn't force me into any conversion therapies, although growing up in the Catholic faith did not do me a lot of good. They didn't send me to a therapist. They did treat me differently. They did say things to me that were inappropriate and difficult for me to stomach. It took me many years to actually come out at that time to tell them that I was attracted to people of the same sex that I had. Gender identity and sexual orientation are two separate things, by the way. None of this took away from the extreme trauma I have experienced over and over, knowing that who I am at my core is something that is vilified in so many ways, and that there would be so many battles I would have to face in my lifetime just to be seen and affirmed. I am incredibly grateful for Senator Hunt, for her courage to be so open, to be one of the first Nebraska state senators to bring forth bills to effective positive change for the LGBTQ plus community, and most importantly, youth in Nebraska. There are many more therapists today who specialize in working with LGBTQ plus youth, and most specifically help those who identify as transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming. The work they do is vital to literally saving lives. How do I know this? Because I'm here today to testify before you. Because in May of 2015, I came out as transgender. As a result of the ignorance and hate I had to face in my place of employment and in my everyday life, trying to explain to people every day who I am, I started seeing a therapist. Thank goodness she was open and affirming of my gender identity. My therapist has never tried to change who I am at my core. She has helped to alleviate so much pain and heartache. I'm literally here today as a proud transgender two-spirit queer man because working with her has provided me a great deal of relief from years of trauma due to the lack of proactive protections of my rightes in all of the spaces that I move around in. The rest of this is there, but I just want to say that do no harm. Do no harm. Do no harm. That is what my people believed. I hope you'll vote to do the same thing. Do no harm.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Are you the last proponent?
Good evening. My name is Angie Salau Phillips. That's SALAHOU-PHILIPS. I'm here today in support of LB 167. As a community organizer and activist, sometimes my advocacy leads folks to reach out to me for resources or help. Several months ago, I had a young Nebraskan man contact me. He shared with me that he was gay and that his parents were religious and believed that being gay is a sin. He was struggling and he needed some support. I've done my best to provide him resources for such information as the Trevor Project, but mostly I've just tried to be a supportive friend and an empathetic ear as he continues to build the strength to come out to his parents and family. He wanted to support this legislation today, but he's too afraid to submit testimony as he is not out to his family and friends, and he is afraid to have his name read out loud here today. So I agreed to come and read his testimony for him. As I read this, I would implore all of you to take into consideration how many more youth's voices have been silenced in this matter, and how many of them risk threats of conversion therapy or other harmful consequences if they do not speak for themselves. Here is his letter. Good afternoon. I am in support of Senator Hunt's bill to ban conversion therapy. I believe that conversion therapy is one of the most dangerous things we could ever have in the United States of America. I'm very proud to be a gay Nebraskan, and when I found out Nebraska didn't have a ban on this very important issue, I was furious. Furious because parents are shaming their kids who are part of the LGBTQ community into going back into the closet. That is absolutely disgusting. I think it's a big abuse to the community since most people think being a member of the community is some type of psychological disease. There is no evidence proving it, so it's dumb to think that people still believe that today, but they do. It should be a shock to people that more teens my age kill themselves because they go into a deep depression or are traumatized. I believe that whoever will say conversion therapy is something we should keep in the state of Nebraska because it will cure people of a disease is so stupid to not even do the research proving that conversion therapy should be banned. They need to think of the fact that being gay, lesbian, bi, or trans is who a person is, and you can't change them or who they are. I'm going to tell you my personal story. When I came out as gay to some friends at the age of 15 years old, I was told being gay was a sin, and they encouraged me to think about what I was choosing. I felt so offended, alone, and unaccepted, I fell into a deep depression. Today, I am 19 years old, and I'm still gay, and I'm still proud. I'm currently still not out to my family, however, due to their religious beliefs based on and the testimony I had mentioned above. But I'm still encouraged to be who I am, and I'm blessed to have friends in my life who support me for who I am. I hope you will support LGBTQ youth and move forward LB 167. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Next, testifier, please.
Hello, my name is Joseph Couch, Josephcouch, and I'm here to submit a letter on behalf of American Atheists and Nebraska Secular Democrats. I had this really parsed out to the important sections and rehearsed to be under 3 minutes, but I think Allison will be very happy to know that all of her research has already been said by some very well-qualified experts. So I'm going to take off those two hats and speak as an individual. I think the committee should note, as the previous speaker alluded to, if everyone were here that weren't afraid of being outed, they wouldn't fit in this room. I don't think they'd fit in this building. There are so many people who can't tell their families, can't tell their friends, can't tell their schools, can't tell their landlords. That's one bit. That's just something I thought of just 2 minutes ago. But what else I was in line to say, we have a couple more people to speak in support of this bill, and after that we're going to hear a couple people speak against this, and you've received a lot of emails against this citing religious freedom. What I'd like to remind anyone listening really is that many of our freedoms in this country are not absolute. One of the widely accepted freedoms that is a little limited is the freedom of speech. I can't go around here right now and yell, "Fire, fire," and ask everyone to leave. For the record, there is not a fire. I can't incite anyone to violence right now. In those ways, my speech is limited. Likewise, freedom of religion is limited. We couldn't have an Aztec in here right now who wish to sacrifice someone to their God and push them off a pyramid or tear out their heart. If my father was having, if my father believed that God told him he needed to kill me to prove his faith to God, and he took me to a mountaintop and raised a knife over me, and then decided not to, the next morning I would call Child Protective Services and have him arrested. Likewise, if any child has their parents submit them to conversion therapy and have their genitals shocked, or likewise torturous acts, Child Protective Services should be called, and certainly no money should be changing hands. Thank you for listening to me, and I will take any questions.
I see no questions, but thank you once again.
Good evening, Chairman Lathrop and members of the committee. Thank you for receiving me today. For the record, my name is Lazaro Spindola, L-A-Z-A-R-O-S-P-I-N-D-O-L-A. I am the Executive Director of the Latino American Commission, and in a previous life I was a trauma surgeon for 20 years. I'm sorry, but by this time, only a small part of my brain is working. So since most of the previous testifiers said most of the things that I was planning to say, you can read them in my testimony, but there are just a couple of things that really bother me. One is the fact that conversion therapy treats gender identification as an acute medical condition. It is not an acute medical condition. Therefore, conversion therapy is based on a faulty premise. And for me, it is not unthinkable, but unforgivable to think that a licensed healthcare professional would be able to practice it. The other thing that bothers me a little is the fact that if we were going to accept conversion therapy as real and effective, then we would need to accept the opposite. That through proper brainwashing, stimulation or whatever, anybody in this room who identifies as heterosexual could be turned into a member of the LGBT community. And I don't think this is possible. I therefore urge you to advance this bill. Thank you, and I would be happy to take any questions.
I see no questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening. Hi. Chairperson Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is James Michael Bowers, J-A-M-E-S-M-I-C-H-A-E-L-B-O-W-E-R-S. I'm a lifelong resident of Nebraska and a constituent of Senator Moorfeld's. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, which means I hold a license as an independent mental health practitioner and a certification as a master's level social worker through the state of Nebraska. My history of practice includes starting my own therapy clinic, working within our school system with middle and high school students, children and adults who are suicidal or experiencing a psychosis at an acute inpatient hospital, individuals with chronic disabilities, people experiencing a range of diagnoses from anxiety and depression to schizophrenia, families in crisis, and a variety of mental health concerns. In addition to my professional practice, I recently spent 4 years at Creighton University teaching social work courses on social welfare, advocacy, and ethics. I'm testifying today in support of LB 167, and I'm testifying on my own behalf. I could spend time repeating the numerous studies that have scientifically proven that conversion therapy is unnecessary, ineffective, and dangerous. I could also take this time to name off the extensive list of mental health and medical organizations that advocate against conversion therapy, and I could spend time sharing with you the heartbreaking stories of individuals who have experienced conversion therapy firsthand. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to share my perspective about our obligations to the public as licensed therapists and social workers. This is not a topic about a simple difference in opinion. This is a matter of evidence-based interventions and selection of treatment modalities and the professional obligation to follow a minimum standard of care to our patients. mental health practitioners are required to earn license in all 50 states. These licenses exist to hold practitioners accountable not only to patients but to our society. A license tells our community that an individual has obtained a specific amount of training, is qualified in the provision of assessment and treatment, and is bound by a code of ethics, including meeting the accepted standards of care. A standard of care is the level at which an ordinary, prudent professional with the same or similar training and experience in good standing in a similar community would practice under similar circumstances, meaning that this is the baseline that a patient can reasonably expect from all providers. A practitioner who engages in conversion therapy is essentially allowing their own personal beliefs to supersede the standard of care established within the mental health community on the basis of evidence-based research and our own professional ethical guidelines. The Nebraska regulations for licensure of mental health practitioners state that unprofessional conduct means departure from or failure to conform to the standards of acceptable and prevailing practice of a profession or the ethics of that profession. I can think of no better example of unprofessional conduct than performing an intervention that over 46 professional organizations oppose. The practice of conversion therapy has been scientifically proven to be ineffective and lead to a higher suicide rate. This practice is incompatible with prevailing standards of care and ethical requirements of mental health providers. For these reasons, LB 167 and 168 have my full support, and I urge you to vote in favor of these bills. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee.
No questions, but thank you, Mr. Bowers. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is more and different from just a difference of opinion.
Correct.
It was a profound statement for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was. When you talked about the standard of care, that is different than what we've been, the type of testimony we've been hearing, and useful.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am John Skinner, John Skinner. I'm a lifelong Nebraskan, currently in Senator Pansing Brooks' district, used to be rural Nebraska. The Judiciary Committee has heard some testimony today, both directly from and also organized by the Nebraska Family Alliance. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more of their thoughts in opposition to LB 167. I'm in support of LB 167, and I would like to give some history of that organization, the Nebraska Family Alliance. Before LGBT rights were much discussed in the early and mid-1990s, they were focused on the issue of divorce. They really disliked divorce. The Nebraska Family Alliance advocated for increasing the court costs associated with divorce, and they advocated for increasing the time taken up by the process of divorce. They advocated even for returning to legal standards that were in place before no-fault divorce laws. Before these laws, it was frequently very difficult for people in abusive marriages to get out of those marriages. The advent of no-fault laws decreased the suicide rate and the rate of death due to domestic abuse because fewer people were stuck in bad marriages. The Nebraska Family Alliance wanted to roll all of that back. They wanted to return to a world in which government power kept abusive marriages together. They threw up almost every obstacle they could to the access to divorce, with one exception. In 1997, Nebraska considered a so-called covenant marriage law that would have created a new, more strict class of marriage similar to pre-no-fault marriage law. The Nebraska Family Alliance director at the time called the law well-intentioned. He thought it was good to wield the power of the state to compel people to endure abuse. But ultimately, they opposed covenant marriage. Why? Only because they thought that creating a new category of marriages could lead to precedent for legalizing gay marriage. So, they're okay with perpetuating abuse, just as they are today by opposing LB 167. They just care that you're not gay. Abuse is worth it to fight the gays. They don't care about the happiness of married couples or children in conversion therapy. They care about strict heterosexual family structure. And back in the 90s, they didn't talk about religious liberty. That talking point hadn't been invented yet. To the contrary, they cared about using the state's ability to regulate marriage to enforce their religious morality upon others. They have not always been concerned with religious liberty, but they've always been okay with abuse. The Nebraska Family Alliance's website identifies the biggest threat to religious liberty in America today as gay marriage. Does that make sense?
What about the LGBT affirming churches such as the Congregational or Episcopalian who want to perform gay marriage? Legal gay marriage actually supports their religious liberty, so no. As used by the Family Alliance, the term religious liberty is just another renaming of homophobia and their desire to enforce that homophobia on the rest of us using the law. They're willing to take liberty in the true sense of the word away from us. My time's up.
Okay. Mr. Skinner, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we have found the last proponent. You're the one we've been waiting for.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Lathrop and members of the committee. My name is Spike Eicholt, S-P-I-K-E-E-I-C-K-H-O-L-T, appearing on behalf of the ACLU of Nebraska in support of LB 167. I deliberately went last as the proponents, not because we do not support this bill strongly, we certainly do, but I wanted to let others who experienced conversion therapy, reparative therapy, their life journey at coming to this point where they showed up and testified here. I want to let them go first because many of them have waited a long time to tell the committee what they told them today. And I wanted to listen to that, and I wanted to honor that by not elbowing my way up here, even though it's late. What did we hear today? And I just try to summarize it because I don't want to repeat anything, but summarizing what we heard today was, first, there's a professional consensus among psychologists, therapists, medical professionals that being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender is part of the spectrum of human identity. It's not a disease, it's not a disorder, it's not a pathology, it's not a mental illness. Any entity or group of people or school, and I use air quotes, or science, again, air quotes, that promises to cure or fix that only causes more harm. And you heard the harm that causes. Physical harm, great psychological harm, emotional harm, and you heard people describe what happened to them, how it forever changed their life. The state has a compelling interest to regulate this type of behavior when it comes to adults, and it has an interest to prohibit it when you talk about children and adolescents. We urge the committee to advance the bill. I've distributed a statement from Dylan Murphy. Dylan couldn't stay. I know it's not necessarily permitted. They had to go back to Omaha. I told him I'd distribute it. I'd ask the committee to review that and read it, though, and it had been included in the record. I'll take any questions the committee has.
I see no questions. Thanks, Mike. Before we move on to opponents, we're going to take a 5-minute break. That's just to give the committee a chance to stretch their legs, if you will.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming today. Even in opposition, thank you for engaging. Thank you. Thank you.
I know it's a long day.
Good to finally meet you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good to finally meet you. Thank you.
but I keep spreading the word.
It's hard.
Well, hey, God bless. Yeah, come on.
Oh, it's fuzzy. Fire and rest.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate that.
Almost said straight that I have gay friends.
There's a DJ somewhere.
I was. Stay down. She was playing. It's like Paul's wife tells us.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, she. Oh, yeah. You know, that's just what so, in subsequent
That's enough.
do it another way.
Just got to go through this.
Whether to stay well or to hear the personal stories. Yeah.
Seats, we'll resume our hearing. While we have people finding their seats, let me just observe that it's the opponents of LB 167 that have had to wait the longest, and so I appreciate your patience. And we will extend to you the same courtesy that we did the proponents. We'd ask you, of course, to observe the lights, and with that, we will begin opponent testimony. Welcome to the Judiciary Committee.
Great. Thank you, Senator Lathrop and members of the committee. And it's been a long day and night, and I do appreciate the kind conversations that are taking place and the heartfelt stories we're listening. My name is Karen Bowling, and I serve as the Executive Director of Nebraska Family Alliance. We can all agree that clients should be in the driver's seat and have the freedom to self-direct their own counseling goals, free from coercion and the use of force. We believe children, parents, and their counselors should together talk freely about the issues the child is experiencing and what counseling would be best for the child's mental, emotional, and physical health. We've received hundreds of calls and emails from concerned citizens, and I will say counselors too. Many of them have submitted testimony for the record. Many have experienced change and benefited by professional counseling. I want to share with you one personal story because Bill called me this week. Bill and I have been friends for 40 years, and we've been on a journey, and he wanted this to be shared. Bill states, as a former practicing homosexual and former advocate for the LGBT community, I am aware of the content within the manifesto put forth by the local and national LGBT task force. The manifesto declares that each human person should have freedom to become whom they are in every aspect of their lives. I was a naturalist and a secularist at the time. I felt sincerely that I had and should be able to live without restrictions placed upon my personal identity. A few years later, I experienced change in my life through the transforming message of Jesus Christ. For support and guidance, I did seek help from faith-based counselors. My fellow advocates within the LGBT community challenged my change of belief, claiming that I had allowed myself to be intimidated by advocates of hate. For if I had once unabashedly claimed that the Christian gospel was hate-based, how was it that I was now devoted by spending the rest of my life spreading the message? My answer is just very simple. I encountered a deeper truth for me and who I was and what I was created to be. So in accordance with that manifesto of the National Task Force, I'm seeking to live without restriction placed upon my personal identity. Bill also expressed concerns, just the consequences to it, because in seeking assistance, he paid. It was a faith-based, but there was a fee to it. And I'll just point the first bullet point. You have the rest in essence of time. The essence of religion is the concept that human persons can experience change in their lives and find true joy in embracing a higher spiritual calling for their existence. Government should protect the right of individuals to practice their faith. Today, you will hear other personal stories just like Bill's. They have experienced authentic change. The state should encourage freedom for all and not interfere with the counselor-patient relationship, infringing on the duty of counselors and mental health professionals to assist the client in achieving their self-determined outcomes and goals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Senator DeBoer has a question.
Yes, Senator DeBoer.
Thank you for testifying this evening. I want to make sure that I understand the places where the Bill 167, since we don't have 168 anymore,
right.
I want to make sure that I understand the parts of your testimony that specifically deal with 167. Do you believe that there should be limits to the kinds of therapy that can be performed on anyone, children, doesn't matter?
Well, the beautiful thing here, as I stated at the top of my testimony, it should never be by force or harm. And one of the things that we heard from clinicians is that actually their ethics code requires that it has to be self-directed. They can't tell a person what to do or not to do. It has to be at their request and self-directed, or they are in unethical violation.
Okay, so would it be fair to characterize your testimony as you think that there are some limitations on the client-therapist relationship?
I think where it gets problematic is in the vagueness of the language in what conversion therapy is. So when you use the language effort and to change behavior, that comes down to interpretation. And recently in the Nifla versus Becerra case before the Supreme Court, that came into play on what was called professional speech.
Okay, so
yes.
I guess I want to get to what you're talking about,
yes.
but I'm not quite there yet. So do we think that there should be some limitations on the client-counselor relationship?
Well, I want to be clear, I'm not a clinician, so I'm going to speak from the clinicians that called with concern. They view themselves as a well-regulated body. A well-regulated body. I'll be very candid with you. I asked every clinician that called, is your concern? And I said, did you do shock therapy? Everyone said no. Please hear, I'm not denying any testimony here, but I have concern when we start to say that the government will regulate clinicians. Well, that language then can't be that vague.
Okay, so maybe what we're saying is that there is some kind of limitation. It's certainly a self-regulation, a self-limitation at the very least that we recognize, and then potentially some additional regulation might happen through codes of ethics and that sort of thing. But then with respect to the bill itself, you think that the language itself covers a larger sort of spectrum of activity than what you think it should. Is that correct? You think it's too vague?
I do think it's too.
Okay.
I think it's just, yes.
So then, if the language were tightened up and it were less vague, would that help to alleviate some of your concerns?
Well, one of the considerations, because the statute then identifies the Nebraska Uniform Deceptive Trade Practice Act, right? So it's in the revised statute 87301, and I've pulled this up. That's going to prohibit any state or local funds from being given to an organization that engages in so-called conversion therapy. So let me create this scenario. So I'm a youth pastor, right? And I'm going to have a conference, or maybe it's for adults. We won't put an age restriction on it. And so it would be from a faith tradition that recognizes what you would call sexual purity. And it's a weekend conference, and so there's a fee for $20 to attend that. Being in the Uniform Deceptive Trade Practice Act, that church could very well come in violation.
But they wouldn't be if they didn't charge the $20, is what you're saying.
But if they have speakers coming?
Sure, but if they didn't charge $20, then they wouldn't be, and if they did, they would. So the problem isn't with the content, the religious content. The problem is with the $20 that goes alongside the religious content.
When you're charging a fee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, my family has gone through this personally, so I am compassionate. And I will tell you, in seeking pastoral care, one of the things that we discovered is people that are trained for the ministry may or may not feel that their training is qualified enough to to counsel the need. And so we'll refer to a professional counselor, and there becomes a situation then where it's a pastor may not be able to meet that need. So you're limiting the scope of people that are trying to really think through difficult issues. They're not decided and have the opportunity.
I recognize that there's a lot of nuance here, and I think that one of the really kind of sad things is that, when we reduce the kinds of statements we make about these cases to very simple kind of slogans, we miss so much of this nuance and the opportunity to talk and find the common ground that we might have. So I really appreciate the time to talk about the details, and to not reduce these questions to, oh, I'm pro this and against that and that sort of thing, but to look at the details. But I do wonder, in the example that you gave, whether a pastor who doesn't feel as many, I don't know if you know, I went to seminary, so many of my pastor friends also don't feel as though they are qualified to perform extensive counseling. Maybe they just don't have time. But then when they turn over that responsibility to someone else, then we've sort of gone outside of the religious aspect of counseling that's being done and turned it over to psychological counseling. I mean, there is a distinction there, isn't there?
But I think it still comes back to the person seeking the counseling should be able to self-direct the counseling that best matches their personal therapeutic goals.
Well, then, in that case, I don't see how 167 would be a problem, because if a person is seeking out a counselor and then self-directs the situation, then there's not been, advertisement or something like that that's happening. Am I missing something here?
When you talk about advertisement, certainly it could be in a church bulletin. To attend a conference, and there's a $20 fee to attend.
Okay, I suppose if the church bulletin said $20 to come to, but I suppose then it would have to be specific to what the content that was being offered was in order to run afoul of the statute, right?
Restate that?
I think if you have the church bulletin, you'd have to have, in order to run afoul of this statute with the church bulletin, even if you're charging money, you would have to be very specific about what we're trying to do is change your sexual identity. Is that right?
Well, if you look at the language defined here, it could be behavior, it can be romantic attractions.
Okay, so it's just too broad. Ultimately, what you're saying is it's too broad, and maybe if we made it narrower, it wouldn't be so broad and it wouldn't be as much of a problem.
We can all agree. None of us, regardless of what side we are on this issue, think there is a place for shock therapy.
Hopefully we all do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, if somebody is here opposing and still supports it, I'm not that person.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah,
and I appreciate
there's
that.
many of us that.
That's why I
yes.
recognized in you the ability to talk about the issue. That's why I wanted to sort of talk through it with you.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Sloan.
Just to clear up a point of confusion in the last line of questioning, to be clear, under section 3, line 2, subsection A, it's also unlawful, in addition to the advertising, to provide conversion therapy to any individual if such a person receives monetary compensation in exchange for such services. So that exchange of the $20 would be, in my reading of the bill, would be in violation of the bill.
That would be my interpretation too.
Thank you for coming today, Ms. Bowling. I'm just, Senator DeBoer asked a question, and I'm glad that we can all agree that shock therapy is not appropriate, and I presume murder is also in that realm and things like that. But I'm also, there are, of course, nuances. There's mental stress by putting kids into a situation. To say that it's up to the clients, meaning the parents, the kids and the counselor. What 12-year-old child has the authority to be able to say no to their parents that they're not going to go and do this? And so, I sit, obviously, no child has that authority. And I think about a time when I was young and my dad was dying, and I was integrally involved in a church, and you know that because we were friends at that point, and we're still friends.
Yes.
But at that point, as my dad was dying, I was told by this group that if I didn't go and make him confess that Jesus is his Savior, that he would be condemned to hell, and that I had to live with that. I never had the courage to do that as a child that was 14 years old. Now, that was a lot of pressure put on me. It wasn't put on me by my family. It was put on me by the people with whom I was organized in the church. So to act as if any of us believe that the church doesn't have certain powers over children or have the ability to, it took me quite a while to get over the fact that my father is not damned to hell. And to put that on a 14-year-old child is sinful. And when I think about what is being placed on these people that testified here today, that's sinful. And so, we can talk about the extreme, but then let's look back down to reality and just some of the prodding and psychological conversations that are placed on this child to make him feel guilty and shameful, make me feel guilty and shameful, is really something that I applaud Senator Hunt for bringing this. I tried to bring this as a legislative resolution this past year, and I could not get the people to come out because people were scared to speak. And so listen to these stories. I think because it was not a legislative, it was not a study, and it was instead a bill, people got some hope. But think of the courage that it has taken for people to come and say this. And so I've given you a long rambling discussion here. How would a child have the ability to say, no, I'm not going to go to this until they get to 18?
That's between the parent and child.
That's the problem, is that it is between, and that's where the government needs to come in and protect the child.
But I'm, as Senator Pansy Brooks, I'm sympathetic to the conversation here. I know we're on opposite sides here, but I think you also need to recognize that, just think for a moment, when you remove a parent, we give kind of carte blanche, a parent in being able to drive a child's well-being. Will there be abuses? Unfortunately, yes. But to craft a vague piece of legislation that potentially eliminates mom and dad, and as a counselor, and Matt will be able to address this from a legal standpoint, they actually, even if a child wants that, an ethical counselor has to honor the child's wishes over the parent's wishes. There are self-protections there already.
We can discuss this off the mic sometime.
That sounds good. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop.
Next opponent, please. We have a lot of people that are patiently waiting, so.
My name's Gordon Opp, Gordon Opp. I'm here from Lincoln, and I'm just here, waited all this time just to tell my story. As a young adult, I experienced unwanted same-sex desires, and I was very conflicted about it. I really wanted those feelings to go away. In those days, there wasn't much written about homosexuality, and it wasn't really talked about. I would go to libraries and try to get information, but rarely did I find anything helpful. I also searched for counselors, but found no help. Then I finally gave in and started accepting my attractions and began living as a homosexual for about 4 years. However, the gay life for me was not fulfilling, and it certainly was very contrary to who I am and to the faith that I hold. Now, I'd heard that there's everything in California, so perhaps I could find a counselor out there. So I hitched up a U-Haul to my car and drove out to Southern California. I went out there looking for help, but I figured if that didn't work out, it was probably the best place to pursue a gay life. In California, I found an awesome counselor at a large church. Finally, I had hope that I could work on resolving this issue that was so dominating in my life. I worked with this counselor for about a year. During that time, I met the woman that I've been married to now for 40 years. We have 3 grown children and 5 grandkids. I have absolutely, positively no regrets regarding the decision I made to work through my conflicting sexual orientation. I've had the life that I wanted to have. I spend a lot of time with my grandkids, and I've been truly blessed. I'm so glad that I found a counselor who helped me move in the direction I wanted to go. I can't imagine that help I longed for and received could now be illegal in Nebraska. I'm forever grateful for the counselor and others who helped me along the way.
Senator Pansy Brooks.
Thank you very much for coming. I just have to ask, so did you pay for the counselor? Did that counselor have training, or was this a clerical person that...
Actually, he was just a youth counselor. He had no more psychological training than Psych 101, and he was the youth counselor at that church. However, my understanding of the law now is that if as an adult now, I could not pursue that type of a counselor and pay for it here in Nebraska.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Opp. Next testifier.
Thank you. Good evening, Senators. My name is Brady Cohn, spelled B-R-A-D-Y-C-O-N-E. I've been born and raised and lived in Nebraska my entire life, and I love the state. I grew up wrestling with sexuality as a teenager. I found after I hit puberty that I was only attracted to other men, but being gay seemed to be a conflict with my faith. The message I received from society and the gay community was that if I was attracted to the same gender, I had no choice but to be gay and to live as gay. I tried to make that work. I tried to accept that identity and lifestyle. It seemed to work for so many people, but not for me. As a 15-year-old, 16, and 17-year-old, I tried to find other options. I searched libraries and the internet, but found no resources or options that would help me live a different life. I was depressed and suicidal at times, and thought that there was no way out. I went off to college a shattered state. As a freshman trying to figure out life, faith, and sexuality, I got involved in a Christian ministry on campus. The students I met there loved me in ways that no one else had ever loved me. They gave me a community where I could belong. And when I shared with them about my life as a gay man, they still loved me. And they wanted to help me live a life that was in accordance to my faith and the best that God had for me. They led me and helped me find resources and stories of people with my background who had changed. I went to a conference and heard a speaker who used to be gay, but he was no longer. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had hope that had never been there before. With the help of various resources and professional licensed counselors here in Nebraska, which would be banned by this legislation, I am now able to live a life that is in accordance to my faith. They helped me understand my attraction, give me encouragement and help. Through this counseling, I started to change how I live my life. And what followed was a change in my identity and a change in my attractions. I now live a life that the LGBT community says is possible. I'm happily married to a wonderful woman. My life is full of peace and joy. Great attempts are made to silence people like me, but there are thousands of us. Our stories and our very existence threaten the narrative and agenda behind the legislation before us today. We have come so far in society in helping all people experience dignity and equality, and that is something I celebrate with my LGBTQ friends, of which I have many. But don't take away that dignity, equality, and religious freedom from people like me by outlawing resources that have been a lifeline to so many people such as myself. It grieves me so much to think that the resources that helped me, which I desperately needed as a teenager and as an adult, could be taken away. I almost lost my life to suicide because there's no place to find hope and the help that I was looking for. Please don't take away those sources of hope and help from a new generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Next testifier. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Matt Sharp, M-A-T-T-S-H-A-R-P, and I'm an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom, and I'm here to discuss the legal implications of LB 167. This bill is a targeted restriction on the speech of counseling clients, licensed counselors, and many others. It targets a specific message that an individual can experience personal transformation to their sexuality or identity for censorship. This bill presumes that the government has broad power to regulate the speech of licensed professionals. But that premise was rejected just last year by the Supreme Court in Netley versus Becerra, which highlighted 2 cases involving state laws that ban so-called conversion therapy for minors as being erroneously decided for holding that counseling speech was afforded less constitutional protection. Relying on this significant new precedent, just last week, a federal magistrate judge recommended that a similar law in Tampa, Florida, be enjoined because the plaintiffs, quote, established a substantial likelihood of success on the merits of their free speech claims under the First Amendment. Thus, Nebraska legislators will likely expose the state to costly litigation if they choose to enact this bill. I want to focus on the 2 most problematic aspects. First, it censors constitutionally protected speech based on its content and viewpoint. And second, that it relies on vague, entirely subjective terminology that leaves counselors and clients alike guessing at what is prohibited. The Supreme Court has long held that it is impermissible for the government to regulate speech, including paid speech, based on its content or viewpoint. Quote, the government action that stifles speech on account of its message poses the inherent risk that the government seeks not to advance a legitimate regulatory goal, but to suppress unpopular ideas or information. Through LB 167, Nebraska seeks to dictate which counseling conversations are permissible and which are not based solely on the views expressed regarding sexuality and gender identity. Speech that helps a person address unwanted attractions or behaviors is banned, while speech that helps someone embrace those behaviors is permitted. And again, restricting certain views and ideas is impermissible under the First Amendment. Next, the First Amendment requires that laws provide clear guidance to ensure that ambiguity does not chill protected speech. But LB 167 is intentionally vague. Determining what speech or other activities violate this ban is an inherently subjective inquiry. The bill does not provide concrete guidance on what types of conversations, conduct, or other activities would be subject to this wide net. As a result, a counselor or other individual is required to guess at an entirely undefined line between services that permissibly provide acceptance, support, and understanding, and those that unlawfully seek to change the person's behaviors related to their sexual orientation or gender identity. So in conclusion, LB 167 infringes the First Amendment rights of counselors and clients. It limits the freedom to explore all counseling options, kicking clients out of the driver's seat, and putting the state in charge of what speech and counseling goals are permissible. Thank you.
Senator Slama.
We've heard reference today to several other states who have implemented conversion therapy bans. Is the bill proposed today different than some of those conversion therapy bans that are in place in states?
Absolutely. So the states that have enacted these laws, and in fact the law that was enacted in Tampa, Florida that I referenced, all dealt with specifically licensed counselors being not allowed to provide this to minors. This one goes far beyond that because we're dealing with adults and their freedom to do this. The fact that it's paid or not is irrelevant because, again, compensation doesn't strip speech of its First Amendment protection. That would obviously frustrate a lot of authors. And so this bill is really going far beyond what any state has done. But even going back to those laws, that's what the court in Tampa was focusing on. And they said, look, if there is an issue that needs to be addressed when you're dealing with speech, you've got to be targeted towards it. And so because this encompasses a broad amount of protected speech, of a confidential communication between a client and its counselor, the government cannot just jump in and say, we're going to tell you what you can and cannot discuss. That's where the court said that particularity of regulation is required in all of this. And that's why even that law that was much narrower than what's being considered here, the court said there's a likelihood that this law is unconstitutional based upon that.
Senator Chambers.
First of all, Florida law is not binding on Nebraska. An injunction is not a decision by the court on the merits of a case. Have you ever heard of the term false advertising?
Yes.
Well, isn't that protected by the First Amendment to allow you to say anything you want to about any product that you're selling?
I believe in that context, and again, I'm not an expert on consumer law or anything like that, but again, we're dealing with speech, and so the first question is this a overbroad, vague regulation of protected constitutional speech? When you're dealing with a transaction, I'm selling you a car, that's one thing, but when you're dealing with a conversation between two people, between an adult client and their counselor, that's a First Amendment issue that doesn't involve just sort of a pure sale of a product or something like that.
The reason I asked you the question, I knew what you didn't know from what you were saying. This is based on the exchange of money for a service. I'm sure you know enough about federal requirements when it comes to regulation of medicines as opposed to these quack items that they sell in these stores called supplements. They're not subject to regulation by the FDA because they don't profess to be medicine. They cannot make any medical claims. It would seem from what you're saying that violates their right to free speech because they should be able to say anything about their product they choose, and if the public accepts it, they should be allowed to do it, but that's not the law. So when you read this law, you see that it's talking about a deceptive practice. Is that what you read in the law that we're talking about?
I do understand that it is telling...
Did you read that language in the law?
That this is putting these conversations under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act? That's correct.
Okay, that's all that I have to ask you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Sorry,
Senator.
I have
All
one
right.
question. I wanted to follow up with a question because sometimes my questions wander and it's not very clear what I'm asking. So I thought I'd ask again. Based on the testimony I heard from you today, would it be possible, since you're saying it's overbroad, would it be possible to narrowly tailor this law in such a way that your objections would go away?
I want to go to that Tampa case because I think this is going to the exact question you're asking. And the court there looked at it, and again, it was a already much more narrow law than the one being considered here. Not involving deceptive trade practices, not involving adults, just simply a licensed counselor cannot provide this to a minor. And the court looked at it and said, the problems they're discussing, the abusive techniques, or the lack of consent on behalf of a minor, if that's the issue, then you draft a law that says a counselor has to obtain informed consent from a minor before they can provide counseling on these issues.
So I think what you're saying is yes, that it could be narrowly tailored in such a way that it would overcome the objections that you have.
I think it can be narrow tailored to address the vagueness concerns. I think there's always going to be an issue when you're dealing with conversations and speech, though. That there is limitations on what the government can ever do when it comes to conversations. And so I think it addresses one concern, but I think there's still other concerns that remain. And I think that's even what the court in Florida said is, what they said is, we want to limit this to techniques, not to speech, not to conversations, but when you are doing a medical procedure technique, and again,
but in talk therapy, the medical procedure is talking. I mean, that's how talk therapy works. So, I mean, that's kind of difficult to talk about how we limit talk therapy any other way than by talking about what speech is or is not clinically acceptable speech for, I mean, you know, certainly I can think of several examples of things that would not constitute clinically acceptable within the scope of practice speech within a talk therapy situation. Asking someone to go kill themselves seems to me like that would be outside of the scope of what a clinical or a talk therapist should be performing as a talk therapist. So there clearly is some speech, and what I'm hearing today is that there's some speech that falls into the category of things that can be properly regulated and can be properly regulated by a state, and there are some things that cannot be properly regulated by the state. Would you agree with that statement?
It depends. I'm sorry, I'm giving the stereotypical lawyer answer. What the court in Florida said is there's a difference between regulating conduct and speech. And if it is speech, the First Amendment applies. And if it is conduct, then there's less protection to that. And so what the court was focusing on is when you're doing anything that deals with speech, the First Amendment applies. If you want to focus on regulating conduct, not conversations and not talk therapy, whatever form that may take, but conduct, that you can look at, and that's what the court ultimately focused on and said that's what it needs to be narrowly tailored because that seems to be the problems.
Okay, so leaving that aside for a second, I mean, we do know that the First Amendment is not an unlimited protection. There are limits to the First Amendment. You've even discussed them, right? So if there are limits, I mean, I'm just trying to go through this logically. If there are limits to the First Amendment and there are, for example, limits involving commercial activity, right? So commercial speech is regulated at a more restrictive level than, say, religious speech, insofar as you cannot say, I'm going to sell you this red pill and it's going to make you into an elephant or I don't know what. But you can't falsely advertise. We know that that's true because we have false advertising statutes. So those kinds of commercial speech have been regulated, right?
There are, even in the First Amendment context, and even with speech, the Supreme Court has ruled that even false statements, so there's stuff dealing with, you know, people claiming to have earned certain service medals and things like that. And again, this is kind of getting beyond the scope, but even things like that, the court has said, are not stripped of their First Amendment protection. There's always this sort of strict scrutiny test is what the court calls it. So you have to say, is there a compelling interest? Is this narrowly tailored? Are there other least restrictive alternatives? That's the analysis that you have to go through. The court in Florida did that and said it doesn't survive all of that. And again, that was a less restrictive bill than the one we're looking at here. When you're dealing with the adults being able to sit down and have a conversation, a consenting, informed adult that can say, this is what I want, this is the goals I want to work for. And again, the compensation is irrelevant and all that to whether it's protected, but that is far outside of what court is.
I think we're mixing the two parts of the bill, or at least maybe I'm mixing them as we're having this discussion. There's the first part, which deals with certification of clinicians, and there's the second part, which deals with the false advertising.
Yeah, I do think, because I don't think that's exactly how the bill lines up. I think the first part says any licensed individual in the state cannot provide this to a minor, period. And then the second part says it's going to be a deceptive practice for any individual to provide this to anyone, adult or child, for compensation, to provide advertising related to this or any of those things. So I think those are the two components. The Florida law I've been talking about was just that first part. This second part goes into all of that. The conversations, all of that is included under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act.
Yeah, and so then it would not really map very well with the Florida case. So we are sort of in a different territory here. I mean, I guess we're kind of at an impasse here, so we don't need to take up more time this late at night. But one thing I am hearing is that there is a very, very, very limited amount of protections that you think might qualify if they go through the strict scrutiny test, so that they look for the compelling state interest and whether they're narrowly tailored to fit the particular circumstances that they're trying to avoid.
Well, that's again what a federal judge in Florida, that's not my opinion, that's what the federal judge in Florida said when it comes to restricting speech when involved in that counseling relationship.
Right, but that's the First Amendment analysis. Is that
right? Which would also apply to a adult paying a counselor to assist with these issues.
Well, the gist of it is it's too broad. It needs to be less broad. Thank you.
Thanks.
Senator Pansy Brooks.
Thank you for being here for questions and waiting this long. So you keep mentioning this Florida case, but the Supreme Court, right, has twice decided not to rule on gay conversion therapy, and one was in 2014, and then the other most recent one was less than a year ago. So you're conveniently not talking about that fact. So would you like to respond to that?
I absolutely would. Thank you for the opportunity, Senator.
You're welcome.
So just last year in the NIFLA case that I mentioned, this was a case dealing with a California law that sought to require pro-life pregnancy centers to basically provide advertising and referral for abortions. And part of the justification, California said, you're engaged in a commercial practice, you are licensed professionals, and we can restrict what you're doing or compel you what to do. The Supreme Court took up that case and ruled against the California law. And part of their ruling, they said, the premise that that professional licensed speech is subject to less First Amendment protection is problematic. And what we're going to do is those two cases you referenced where the Supreme Court had previously been asked to take review and declined, which again is not a ruling on the merits or anything like that. The Supreme Court cited to both of those as pointing to these are instances where the courts problematically stripped away First Amendment protection for licensed speech. The court in Florida then looked at that and said, it's clear that the Supreme Court is giving us new direction, new precedent, saying the premise of those previous decisions is now called into question, and this whole idea that this speech is entitled to less protection is problematic, and that's why the court ruled that way, based upon this most recent Supreme Court precedent on these issues.
Well, I will just say that is not what I'm reading in the online, so we can discuss this off the mic again, but that is nowhere near what I'm reading online about that, so thank you for that, though.
Senator Chambers.
Counselor, I'm concerned about children. I'm concerned about people with power torturing weak people. Have you ever had electrical shock applied to your testicles?
No, I have not.
How do you think you'd like that?
I think anyone would be very opposed to that.
Are you aware that that is considered torture?
I'm not familiar with the international laws, but I do think that is abusive.
I don't just mean international law, in America. Somebody was found to have put a person in a position to electrically shock his testicles. That would be considered torture.
And that's what the court in Florida said. When you're looking at that, if that's what you want to address, you do a targeted law towards that. You do not do a broad prescription on all constitutionally protected speech.
I'm not talking about what you said the Florida court ruled. I'm talking about conduct that is embraced in what these people want to do to children. Unless you think those testifiers were lying. That's my first. Do you think they were telling the truth when they talked about what they experienced?
I do believe.
Okay. When one said that he was shocked with such a large jolt that he was unconscious, and when he woke up, a large chunk of his tongue was missing. You approve of that being done to children, don't you?
No.
Do you have children?
Yes, I do.
Would you agree to let some people in a church tell you they should be allowed to apply electrical shock to your child's testicles?
I love my children and would protect them with my life.
And if somebody did that to my child, they wouldn't be here talking now. I'd be on trial someplace, and I don't think a jury would convict me. Here's what I'm getting to. All of these side issues mean nothing to me. They can be handled in court. But when I know there are children right now with parents so foolish, preachers so lacking in concern, that these children will be tortured for the sexual gratification of adults, then I'll do all I can to stop it. And see, I'm not going to beat around the bush and play. The schools that were in black communities use corporal punishment against our children. So I got it outlawed in all the public schools in the state of Nebraska. I got a law that made it, even before the U.S. Supreme Court said it could be done, that if somebody was under the age of 18 when they committed a murder, they could not be executed. I didn't wait for the U.S. Supreme Court. I care about young children, and I know how adults abuse children. Sex trafficking goes after children because they're vulnerable, and a lot of these things happen in churches. Look at one of the biggest churches in the world, the Catholic Church. And now they find out that the priests and the bishops were sexually assaulting nuns. So don't tell me what these churches are about. I think they are cesspools of sin. I think these scoundrels hide behind religion. And that's what I'm looking at. And I don't care if all the preachers hear me. I want them to know that I'm like the hound of heaven. I'm on their trail. And if I can find a law or enough senators, I will get a law to stop this torturing of children. Now, we can discuss things like whether you're regulating speech too much, because that is not involving anybody currently facing torture. This stuff these people want to talk about in terms of this perversion therapy involves torture. You know what the letters, to get in your territory, do you know what the letters FCC stand for?
I believe the Federal Communications Commission.
Bingo. Now, what is communication? Does that involve speech?
Yes, it does.
And the FCC regulates that, doesn't it?
And the Supreme Court has also recently called into question some of those regulations on the idea that commercial speech is entitled to less constitutional protection.
Counselor, if you don't mind answering the question, you don't have to obfuscate me. I understand the law. I don't dress like a lawyer, but my brain operates like one. Just so, in the interest of disclosure, I have a law degree. Now, are you aware of why these big pharmaceutical firms who advertise their medications on television tell you all of the side effects, some of which are fatal? Do you think they do that voluntarily? They were told by the FCC that they cannot advertise products unless they tell all of the side effects. And what the big pharma, as it's called, will do is tell you these side effects. But since they're advertising on television, they distract you from listening to what they're saying by showing things to engage your sight, and you will not hear what they're saying. They might have children playing with an animal, or two young people really enjoying each other's company, but speech is regulated in this country. It can be, but that is not the crux of what I'm looking at. I will let those arguments be carried through by you and others who have the time for that. But I'm serving notice to these brutal, torturous, cruel, vicious adults who will consent to children being tortured, have my, and it matters not to them, contempt. But they need to pay attention because I'm in the legislature, and unlike some politicians, I will try to get legislation to stop it. And I will use the floor of the legislature as my bully pulpit to explain to the people in Nebraska what these people who practice perversion therapy are actually doing to these children. And sometimes shaming is used against children and weak people, but the right shaming can bring politicians to heel. I've seen it done. I've done it. You're paid to be here today. You're paid to represent your client. You will say whatever needs to be said to win your client's case. That's what lawyers do. I don't fault you for that. That's what lawyers do. I'm one of those people who will say that Jack the Ripper is entitled to a zealous defense. Not that the attorney has to agree with what the person is accused of, but since the only time conduct is criminal is when a statute makes it so. Accompanying that prohibition are rules of the game which will tell you what you must do as the state to be able to impose a punishment on this person for violating that rule. And the goal of the lawyer is to make sure that before the state imposes a punishment, it follows its own rules. The state must cross every T. The state must dot every I. And if gathering information, the state violates the law with an illegal search and seizure, then the lawyer's job is not to say that what was seized is allowable, that it's good. It might be pornography. What the lawyer is saying, you got it the wrong way. So those are arguments that I'm not concerned about here. I was outraged at what I heard from these people who were persecuted, and they've got so-called Christians running in here talking about that that's good and they want to be able to do it. If I can stop them by whatever forces there are, I will. And now I'm not going to interfere with your earning your living, because you're doing it in more or less an honest fashion.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Senator Wayne.
Just so I'm clear, because I kind of got lost for a second. The minor provision, you believe is legal or not legal?
I believe, in light of NIFLA and is the Florida case, which was just focused on a virtually identical minor, licensed counselor providing to minor, the Florida court enjoined it. So I do believe, it's unconstitutional according to the Florida court.
Again, injunction doesn't meet the merits, but we can look at a lot of district courts across the country and find a case that one ruled one way or another. But it is clear that the Supreme Court has twice declined to take the California case. Essentially, the minor provision is still constitutional, as it says to California.
I don't believe so. I believe the NIFLA case provided guidance to say the premise of those previous cases is no longer valid because they were premised upon the idea that licensed speech gets less First Amendment protection.
Okay. So are you talking dicta or are you talking overruling the case?
Well, it was guidance from the Supreme Court that influenced this Florida court, and I think we take all of that into account. And again, that's my goal here, is to provide this committee with the most up-to-date legal information of what the Supreme Court and others.
We're talking back and forth and we're talking around each other. Was the case overruled?
Well, it wasn't addressing those. It was addressing the California law.
So the California law is still legal in the the United States?
No, the California law, it was, again, that was a law compelling pro-life pregnancy centers to promote and advertise abortion. It was struck down.
I'm talking about the provision for minors and conversion therapy.
Those previous cases are still on the books, but there are new legal challenges in light of this new precedent from the Supreme Court.
So it still stands, right? Can you give me an honest answer here?
Yeah, as of right now, but again, there's new legal challenges being brought up.
Okay, there's new legal challenges being brought up, but the second piece is where you think there's more of a gray area.
The second piece is obviously much broader because, one, we're dealing with adults and who can provide informed consent on all these things. We're dealing with advertising. We're dealing with far beyond a narrow interest in minors, but in the ability of an adult to sit down and have an honest conversation.
Okay, my last question is, as being a good attorney, you want to make sure you research both sides of the issue so you're not caught off guard. Give me a case that's on the other side.
Well, I think you referenced them, the two cases that upheld California and New Jersey's law, but then the Supreme Court is now called into question. So, again, I would strongly encourage everyone to pull a copy of the Florida decision. It analyzes all of those. It looks at those two previous cases from California and New York. It looks at the Supreme Court's decision in NIFLA, and it looks at another case involving regulation of attorney speech. And it took all of those together and said, taking all of these, as things stand right now, we think there's a substantial likelihood that you're going to prevail on your First Amendment claims.
That Florida decision, was that a district decision or a court of appeals?
It was a district decision. It's early in the case.
For those who are not attorneys, where does a district decision work as far as persuasive authority versus a court of appeals?
I think it's relevant authority for this body to take into account when looking at this law. And I think is it binding on Nebraska? No. But again, it's part of the relevant authority to look at when deciding whether to enact a law.
Thank you for being here.
My privilege.
Next testifier.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry Storer, S-T-O-R-E-R, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, 68132, District 8. Let me start from the front. I saw that movie. I didn't like that movie. I didn't like the depiction of the word of conversion therapy. But I also didn't like the assault on churches. This is not about churches. This is about people that weren't able to help other people. And we have a United States Constitution, that's state constitution also, that covers most of these laws. I know you don't like to hear this. The U.S. Constitution is paramount to most of what we've heard tonight. You have no right to impose on me. Now, I don't hate any of these people that are LGBTQ, WXYZ, and now we probably should have liberals and 501c3s, people that are paid to come here and lobby against me. I'm an elector in Nebraska. I am a homeowner, a taxpayer, and I really can't afford all this silliness. Absolutely can't. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you should be doing this. Other people's job. Unfortunately, some of those are lawyers and judges. I wonder how many Douglas County Court judges have sent children out of the state. That's come up a few times. Did they get conversion therapy out there under a juvenile court judge's order? Quite possibly, but they didn't call it conversion therapy. I believe there was something like that possibly over in Clarinda, Iowa. Sexual assault. Those children were sent out there without parents' involvement, without parents' okay. Some of these bills, that stack full of there, are talking about taking rights away from parents, converting children. Well, I have a grandson that's had a lot of conversion therapy, and I'm having conversion therapy from my government. Is anybody going to help me? Can I scream for help and expect tax dollars to pay for it? Thank you. I don't hate them. I'd like to help them. But unfortunately, the powers fighting me have more say-so than I do and more money than I do. And I don't like it. I can't afford to pay for it with my tax dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Storr.
My name is Glenn Smith, GlennSmith, and honored members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to express my concerns about LB 167. I am the executive director of Camp Witness Bible Conference Association in North Central Nebraska, Long Pine, Nebraska. And I believe that this particular bill, as it's drafted today, puts my particular organization at risk for a number of reasons. We can talk about freedom of speech, we can talk about freedom of religion, we can talk about even how this might affect freedom of assembly. But in reality, I believe this particular bill, because of the fact that conversion therapy is so loosely defined, I agree completely with the senators and the people who've said electrocution, torture is not appropriate for children. But the way you read this bill, the only thing that a person is allowed to say is, we agree with what you've chosen. You're not allowed to present an opposite opinion or a different opinion, or even to guide them in a different direction. As a camp, I am annually required to license my organization with the state, and we're inspected. I believe that LB 167 could be interpreted to prohibit us from teaching what we believe is a biblical view of human sexuality as a licensed organization within the state. I believe that God has created and spoken, and as the creator, he has the authority to say things about his creation, and that's our position when it comes to his revelation. LB 167 would limit us in these freedoms because we have our kids who pay to come to our camp. Do we do anything that's close to some of the abuse that's seen here? No. But we have young people who come to us who are struggling with decisions in their life, who are concerned about how they're going to fit into society. And our goal is to take them to the scriptures and to teach them what we believe the Bible teaches about a relationship with him and about human sexuality. And based on this particular thing, I believe that we could be in violation of this because we take fees and because we do not necessarily encourage them to follow this lifestyle. By default, a discussion of human sexuality with a biblical perspective by our faculty, by our facilities, by our staff, some of which may be licensed counselors, some of which might be licensed some other way. That is another fault of this particular bill. It says if you're a licensed practitioner under this particular bill, if I have a licensed plumber who says, I think you should reconsider what the Bible says about this, it doesn't say what kind of clinician that this is. It just says a licensed person under this bill. There's lots of licensed people under this bill, and they're all at risk if they have this discussion. I acknowledge the area of conversion therapy is something that it saddens my heart what I heard today, and the examples of these young people mistreated. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming down here. Did you come all the way from Long Pine?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Well, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, Senator Chambers has a question.
Yes.
When you'd mentioned you talk to them in terms of what the Bible has to say about,
right.
Are you a minister?
My degree is in pastoral ministries, correct.
It again?
My degree is in pastoral ministries and Bible, yes.
But I'm asking, do you consider yourself a minister? Do you consider yourself a minister?
Yes.
Okay. Then you know something about the Old Testament, don't you?
Yes.
You know about David and Jonathan, don't you?
They were good friends.
No, it used the word love. Since you are a minister, look up the word that was used, and you'll see it's the same word that is applied in terms of the love between a man and a woman. And I'm saying, look it up and see for yourself, because you study and check it out. And I'm not just talking about the English word, but that's all that I have. I like to challenge people's pure minds.
Thank you for your time.
Very good, thank you. Good evening.
My name is David Pickup, D-A-V-I-D, P-I-C-K-U-P. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and 95% of my clients are boys and men who are successfully undergoing reintegrative therapy. This bill being considered is child abuse. These bills like this make it illegal for children to receive therapy for unwanted homosexual feelings caused by sexual abuse, by older teens, or even pedophiles or emotional abuse. Can you imagine a boy walking into a therapist's office to be told that it's illegal to give him the therapy that really does resolve his sexual attractions, homosexual attractions, caused by an abuser? That happens in my office every week, except they get the help that they need. Do you know what it feels like to be heterosexual and sexually abused by a pedophile? I do. I do. I underwent authentic reintegrative therapy years ago for homosexual attractions because of sexual and emotional abuse that I experienced as a child. And just like many abused children in the U.S., some in the news for years, this sexual stimulation resulted in my unwanted homosexual attractions in puberty. Authentic reintegrative therapy helped save my life, and my sexual feelings changed. And yet, with the documented cases of sexual abuse of minor boys, even in Nebraska, from the Nebraska Journal-Star, somehow this bill is here. Evidently, the sponsors of this bill have not thought or cared about all children. If they did, they would have at least amended this bill to account for the professional licensed therapy for unwanted attractions that truly does work. I can't imagine a parent who does not love and support their child by denying them these therapeutic needs for these particular issues. My colleagues and I, approximately 15 of us, are the leading experts in change therapies in the U.S. and in the world. The sponsors of this bill have not even bothered to ask professional therapists or testimonials of successful clients actually what goes on in these sessions. Real therapy, especially in my office, is about the rise of the authentic, secure, gendered self. It's about resolving the emotional issues that can cause homosexual feelings and gender dysphoria for those who know that for them, their feelings are not genetically inborn. It's about resolving inferiority, depression, and suicide ideation. This bill would have you believe that we do electroshock, aversion therapy, or shaming techniques. I'm almost having trouble expressing my anger if I wasn't so sad.
Mr. Pickup, your time is up.
I'm open for any questions to describe to you exactly the misrepresentation all of you have made here today. I'm sickened in my heart, and I can prove it with documentation.
Sir, I don't see any questions. We appreciate you coming all the way from Texas.
Where's my hug? Why would I? From someone who obviously hates me and doesn't know anything about me or my clients.
That's not Christian cheer.
You know what? We're not going to do that tonight.
He's not a Christian.
That's why this is about children, sir.
What did he say? Oh, I thought he said he killed me.
Good evening.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Charlene Edmondson, Charlene Edmundson, and I'm just a grandma. And I'm a grandma with a family that has several homosexual children in it. And you know what? They're all cousins, they're all family. We love them all the same. Something's come to my mind, and I've heard so many people talking about it, and I'm so troubled. The escalation of the number of children that are gender confused. And I really dug down and did some studying on that. And I'd like to go back to 2014 when the Lincoln School District hired a group called Gender Spectrum. And I'm sure they did it out of compassion, thinking, how can we make all the kids feel equal? And what they did was, with this gender spectrum, they removed all of the pronouns, the he's and the she's, and they referred to them as, and you can't make this up, they preferred to talk to them as groups of animals and color-coded instead of by their DNA that they were born with. So fast forward 5 years, what do we have but a bunch of kids, even though it was I don't know what they were feeling, but I'm sure that their teachers, they love kids. Now we got kids that are escalating and they don't know who they are. And I just, I don't know what to say about that. Now this bill, so some of our kids in our family like their lifestyle. They don't want to change, and some of them want therapy. And I want, for those kids that want therapy, I want them to be able to get good quality therapy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Catherine Russell, Kathryn, Russell, Russell, and I live at 1721 South 108th Street, Omaha, Nebraska. I want to thank all of you for standing up to all of this today. I know you're tired, I can see it in your faces, but thank you for listening, and thank you for listening to us. I am going to be simple but sincere. Tonight, as I sat here and I listened to the heartbreaking testimony of those people who spoke tonight, I want to apologize to them, and I know that every heart here, no matter what side they were on, feels terrible for them. That the pain that they've suffered cannot be resolved by this committee, by this evening, by this group of people, only through God. But I am so confused by people defining or trying to define what conversion therapy is. You saw tonight how many cases were sampled, and it wasn't conversion therapy. So when we look at this and we look at not paying people, not paying counselors over conversion therapy, we don't even agree on the definition of it. It's going to be very confusing, it's going to be mind-boggling, and it's going to be an insurance nightmare, and it's going to keep parents from seeking that help for their children. Now, you don't want to create that. I know you don't. I'm afraid that you, by doing this, are taking the rights away from parents for getting their children therapy. And I know you don't want to do that, but that's what you're going to do. And I have a feeling that some people are doing this because they want to pass LGBT laws or regulations or destroy the family and promote LGBT lifestyle. I don't think you want that. I don't really think you want to have that happen. We need a family unit. Don't take parents' rights away to get their children help. There are many children who go through dysphoria and they don't know if they're a girl or a boy for a while. The World Herald, Dr. Stephen Dorn wrote an article, and it says that according to the World's Professional Association for Transgender Health, only 6 to 23% of children with gender dysphoria persisted into adulthood with this identification and identified themselves with the opposite sex. Now, if that's the number of people who have gender dysphoria and decide to go and become an LGBT, don't you think that the other 75% need good counseling. And who are you? We don't want children to go through shock therapy and castration. We're not talking about that. But there has to be good therapy for children, and you have to see to it that they get it. Don't take away the rights of parents, please. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Russell, and it's been a long day for all of you that have been waiting for your opportunity to testify. Good evening.
Good, it does move forward. Good evening. Chairman Lathrop, Vice Chairman Pansing Brooks, members of the committee, my name is Barbara Gard, B-A-R-B-A-R-A. My last name, Gard, G as in George, A-R-D as in David. I live in North Omaha, and I am a professional educator. On the notes that you get are my degrees, what I have, and where they're from. I don't want to waste time with that. Senator Chambers, if you were to introduce a bill outlawing conversion therapy that is identified as physical abuse, such as electric shock treatments, beatings, starvation, isolation, any of these things, you would not have a single person who would be up here opposing that. We don't want that to happen to anyone. That is not why we're here in opposition to 167. Under 167, basically what it says, this bill declares that the state of Nebraska encourages and allows only those counselors who will promote same-sex attractions and gender identity that is contrary to physical reality. Anyone who is willing to talk, or more importantly, just to listen to someone who is struggling with these feelings, who does not want to be struggling with these feelings, or they are experiencing gender dysphoria, they just need somebody to talk to. If they do not approve of these feelings and tell the person they should feel that way, if instead they try to encourage them that yes, you can overcome these feelings, you can embrace your gender identity that you had at birth, that somehow to do that they are motivated by a desire to hurt these people, and they should be forbidden from doing so. I want to call your attention to a report that was published in the journal The New Atlantis in the August 2016 edition that challenges everything the media is trying to tell us about sexual orientation and gender identity. It was co-authored by two of the nation's leading scholars on mental health and sexuality, and summarizes over 200 peer-reviewed studies. And let me just, some of the highlights. Only a minority, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have time for this, only a minority of children who express gender atypical behavior will continue to do so into adulthood. But those who go through sex reassignment surgery, their chances of suicide jump by 41%.
Ms. Gard, we have your testimony. We can...
Yes, please take the time to read it. It's important to know both sides of the story. And thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But thank you all for your service to the people of Nebraska. You're here because you care about us. And I want you to know we appreciate each and every one of you, whether we agree with you or not. And forgive me for taking all the extra time.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you.
And welcome back to the legislature, Senator Lathrop.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Sam Trine Woodard.
We just need to have you speak into the mic just a little bit more so we can all hear.
My name is Ametrine Woodard.
Perfect. Can you spell your name for us?
Ametrine.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you for letting me speak my opinion. I oppose the law of LB 167, and I ask that it not be passed because of these concerns. As a child, I was abused, and I personally believe that someone should have a right to be able to seek help if they want help. I also have TBI, which makes it sometimes hard for me to speak, so being up here is hard. I'm not trying to judge anybody, but I am saying that it also is taking away the right for people to have their right to speak and speak their beliefs. And that if they don't want to feel a certain way, they should be able to get help. And I believe that God created us all, man and female, and that we all have fallen short of the glory of God, and I'm not judging one sin or another. There's none that are greater than another. I'm just saying that I needed Jesus and I wanted Jesus, and he saved me.
Okay. Thank you for coming here tonight. We appreciate it. I'm sure that wasn't easy to stand up and talk in front of this many people, huh?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. Well, thanks for doing that. We appreciate your patience. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Faith Gauthier, Faithgauthier. I am here to testify as a Nebraska citizen and as a registered nurse. As a nurse, I have cared for many patients from the LGBT community, but one in particular stands out in my mind. This patient had already lost both his father and brother to AIDS, and his mother had died of cancer. He was HIV positive and in the hospital for surgery. As a result of his lifestyle, he had developed venereal warts on his anus, which prevented him from having bowel movements. As a result of his sexual activities, his rectum had been perforated and he had an opening allowing feces out of his intestinal tract. He had had several surgeries prior to this one to treat issues related to his lifestyle, and he was in agony. He was only 19 years old. After his surgery, we gave him all the pain medications that we could safely give him, but still he was in a great deal of pain. He could not sit or lie down because of the pain, but it hurt to walk too. He was depressed and anxious. There was concern for his well-being when he was discharged. Possible suicide or choosing drugs or alcohol to numb his pain were very real concerns. If LB 167 were to pass, it would make it illegal to offer counsel to this young man should he come to me, other medical professionals, counselors, or clergy who could help him leave this lifestyle. Essentially, if he chooses to leave a lifestyle that is destroying his health, he must make those lifestyle changes alone without support or help from anyone. Where is his choice? Is his only choice to live an LGBT lifestyle but not leave it? He was only 19 years old and had been in this lifestyle for years. It is very likely he was abused as a child, but at the very least had been sexually active in this lifestyle as a child. It is very sad to me to think of a world where no one could have ever spoken truth about what could potentially happen to his body as a result of this lifestyle choice. Many adolescents are confused and change their minds frequently during childhood and especially during the teen years. What if a confused child or teen asks and would like to get counseling in this area? Are they allowed a choice or only the choice of the LGBT lifestyle? I would like to say that I am completely opposed to any shock therapy or any physical therapy that would be considered child abuse. That is not what I'm talking about. But I am strongly opposed to LB 167, and I would ask you to vote no on this bill.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening, Senators. My name is Richard Netley. It's Richard Netley. I'm here today speaking as a concerned citizen. I would like to take issue, I guess, with some of the preliminary comments by the senator who introduced the bill, specifically regarding the fact that the allegation that this bill has to do with medical therapy, mental practitioners. I did not see that anywhere in this particular bill. It did appear in LB 168 specifically. But in this bill, the definition of therapy is, again, a little vague, and I don't want to spend time because it's already been hashed. But the definition in this text for therapy is a sweeping definition. The definition goes beyond trying to change sexual orientation, the inclination. It prohibits efforts to change behaviors, the act. This clause would limit a pastor's obligation as a paid professional to teach and preach a message of repentance, conversion, and abstinence. You can make an argument that on any given Sunday, pastors are engaged in forms of therapeutic conversion or conversion therapy. As Jesus said, make disciples, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Unless you are converted, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Go and sin no more. LB 167 is overly inclusive. It enjoins a parent or guardian who may also be an accredited professional, specifically a dentist, a chiropractor, a massage therapist, a cosmetologist, a podiatrist, a speech pathologist, a veterinarian, or a well driller. It subjects them to the potential loss of their license and livelihood if they attempt to influence their child's protected behavior, a notion that should be anathema to good parenting. Nebraska legislators should strive for the demise of draconian and abusive reparative measures, but reject these bills as the wrong way to do it. And in conclusion, I would just like to remind the senators that the rainbow also has significant sacred symbolism for Christians.
Okay. I don't see any questions for you, but thanks for coming up, Mr. Netley, and your patience tonight and waiting. For everyone that's waited this long to be heard. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Lathrop and members of the committee. I am Kyle Gomez, K-Y-L-E, G-O-M-E-Z, from Rosalie, Nebraska. I come before you today to address this committee on LB 167 and what was 168. I was reading the other day, November 1st, 2004 NBC news release about a young girl who was unable to feel pain. This condition is called CIPA, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhydrosis. The disease makes a young girl incapable of feeling extreme temperatures, hot or cold, disabling her body in many ways. This is a quote from her mother. Some people would say that's a good thing, but no, it's not, says this young girl's mother. Pain is there for a reason. It lets your body know something's wrong and it needs to be fixed. I'd give anything for her to feel pain. Sometimes in our life we try to fix things and we want no pain involved. We will stay away from it and twist the meaning any way we can. It seems strange to some people that a mother would give anything for her child to feel pain. But the mother knows that in that pain, she would be kept from many injuries and possible life-ending injuries. In the bills you are proposing today, there is a misnomer that talk with an individual diminishing same-sex attraction is abuse. Sometimes we want to substitute a word like truth with a word like abuse because it can be uncomfortable to hear the truth and even painful. But without it, we would have chaos and confusion. If 2 + 2 were 5 to one person and 3 to another, then someone would always be getting more than they deserve or less than they deserve. Yes, truth is restrictive, and it may be painful for a while, but the Word of God says it will set you free. I agree that the truth can be parceled out with a hammer or in love. The problem with this bill is that it stops and condemns any truth. It stops free speech, free religion, and the ability for parents to do what is right in their sight. In summary, I come today to voice my opposition as these bills take away religious freedom and free speech. They also confine any parent to seek therapy they want for their children. These bills are limiting parental decision-making based upon someone's opinion. Some people may agree with that opinion, but some may not. And I tell you today, I do not agree with it, but it is unfortunately trying to be cast upon everyone in this state as law, and I oppose these bills.
Mr. Gomez, thanks for being here.
Good evening. I thought I'd be saying good afternoon. My name is Donna Owen, DONNA-OWEN. I reside in Omaha, and I am in the district of Senator Hunt. You have my testimony, but I want to preface it with something first. When I first started listening to Senator Hunt's talk about her bill, I was horrified. Absolutely horrified, and I concurred with Senator Chambers. I believe that torture of any kind is barbaric. It does not belong in our country. It shouldn't be given to a person, whether you agree with them, what their lifestyle is, if they are friend or foe of the United States. I do not abide torture. I'm the mother who thought a doctor was crazy when he said, let the baby cry, it'll develop their lungs. No torture. So I really thought about not testifying because I want no torture. However, and this has been stated by you, that perhaps the bill needs to be encompassed. Because of my respect for Senator Chambers, I would welcome him to work with Ms. Hunt and get a bill that's concise, that deals only with barbaric tortures, isolation, anything like that. Because where I disagree with Senator Chambers, because I've heard Judge ad infinitum say, catch it on appeal, the things that this bill can do will result in future lawsuits, will result in people having to defend themselves from what can come down the line, and having worked against things for over 50 years of laws being made, I know a small law intended to protect sometimes becomes evil incarnate 40 years later. We've seen it happen last week. So with that, I'm going to read my testimony. LB 167 violates not only the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but the Nebraska Preamble and Constitution as well. The two most grievous violations are the freedoms of speech and religion. If, as the Bill of Rights and the Nebraska Preamble plainly state that our unalienable rights are endowed by our Creator, Almighty God, and therefore cannot be revoked by man or government, then that right, when applied to freedoms of speech and religion, must come from a source. That source, referenced without exception by the Founding Fathers, was the Bible. So when a counselor, teacher, pastor, or anyone listed in the proposed bill uses that foundational source of long-standing Judeo-Christian precepts that even the Founding Fathers used to frame our very government, some persons with loss of liberty will be charged with a felony conviction. It should be noted that these bills are a one-way street, and no such restrictions are placed on atheistic dogmas. Supreme Court Justice Scalia wrote that, in all cases, religious beliefs override atheistic dogma. Sorry.
I know. We'd love to give everybody 10 minutes, but
That's all right.
we have your testimony.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, thanks, Ms. Owen.
Good evening, Chairman Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Tom Venzor, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Catholic Conference. That's TOMVENZOR. The Catholic faith recognizes the supreme dignity of every person as made in the image and likeness of God. The only appropriate response to this reality is charity, willing the good of the other. Charity extends to every aspect of our lives, including the ways by which we counsel and assist those who present themselves with any number of life's problems. LB 167 attempts to deal with the phenomenon of conversion therapy that has been utilized in counseling settings. Undoubtedly, conversion therapy is a loaded term, and like any such term, it includes a number of problematic definitions, but also includes a number of benign dimensions. The task before us today is to make critical and necessary distinctions between those two things. It seems universally acknowledged, although I should say almost universally acknowledged, that the problematic dimensions of conversion therapy are inappropriate, unhelpful, unsafe, and unethical, and disciplining those who utilize such practices is already appropriately handled by the relevant professional licensing body. And for some of the things that I think have been discussed today in terms of abusive and coercive methods, I mean, a lot of those sound like they would be subjected to criminal penalty as well, and they should be roundly condemned. Unfortunately, despite the introducer's own comments about her bill, LB 167 is not only restricted to this notion of harmful conversion therapy, but also includes practices such as talk therapy, which helps clients choose the counseling and personal therapy goals best for them through the ability to explore the issues they present. The overly broad definition of conversion therapy in LB 167 is deeply problematic, which has been made clear by other testifiers. But I want to provide a few examples in light of a couple of the provisions of the bill. Section 3.1 applies the definition of conversion therapy to licensed credential holders with regard to minors. And I want to offer a scenario. Consider a 17-year-old male who experiences a sexual or romantic attraction for somebody of the same sex. He considers these attractions to be unwanted and desires not to act on these attractions and live chastely. He would not be able to see a mental health care provider to work through these attractions and find a way to seek his own goal of living a fully integrated human sexuality that is consistent with his own moral convictions. As well, the scope of Section 3.2 is harrowing, as it applies to any person who provides talk therapy. And again, to offer a couple scenarios here, you can imagine the pastor who runs a support group for same-sex attracted individuals through a church-run ministry, and they host a half-day conference where, there's some advertising for the event event, whether it be on Christian radio or websites, Christian newspapers, etc. Such a half-day seminar would violate Section 3.2b and be liable to the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. And again, consider an Orthodox Jewish temple where they may provide access to members to a part-time counselor who's being remunerated by the temple itself. And again, that counselor may be dealing with any number of issues, including relationship issues or human sexuality issues, and an individual could come to that setting and be liable for that. So I've got a little bit more there, but I'll end since I see the red light.
You do have your written testimony.
Sure do.
I do not see any questions, but thank you for your
appreciate it. Thank you.
Being here late into the evening. Next testifier.
We don't have any copies.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. I am Dr. Lou, L-O-U, Safranek, S-A-F-R-A-N-E-K. I practice as a specialist in the treatment of infectious diseases and have throughout my career afforded talented and concerned care to persons in the LGBT community. I see three principal questions surrounding the practice of conversion therapy. First, is the attempt to align the gender identity of a child or adult with their genetic sex worth pursuing? I spent a great deal of time in the past 3 years working with the Omaha Catholic Archdiocese to review numerous curricula addressing the sexual formation of young people so as to select programs that we could recommend to teachers and parents. These curricula will serve to develop young people who will establish healthy relationships with members of the opposite sex, relationships that will regularly lead to marriage and family formation. The countless hours that teachers and parents contribute to develop and deploy these curricula clearly show how highly these efforts are valued. This leads to the second question. When an individual finds that their gender identity fits imperfectly with their genetic sex, can this fit be restored? In fact, we know that most individuals who at some point have experienced a misalignment nevertheless have realigned their gender identity with their genetic sex in adulthood. Clearly, gender identity can be malleable. Finally, can people or environments help align gender identity and genetic sex? Yes. Prior to my present service with the Omaha Archdiocese, I spent much of 2 years studying the sexual education curricula that were being considered by Omaha public schools. Among the roughly 20 curricula I've studied in the past 5 years, I can see clearly that some curricula have a vastly better chance of promoting an alignment of gender identity and genetic sex. We as parents, friends, and educators can facilitate that alignment. Let me address the present bill. Trained professionals might even better facilitate this alignment than particular parents, churches, or educational systems, and even better approaches will develop in the future. We should at this time not criminalize the efforts of professionals who are improving our means to help individuals align their sex and gender identity. Individuals or parents of children who wish to seek out such professionals deserve this opportunity. These professionals deserve support and not condemnation. I urge you to vote against the proposed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Safranek. We appreciate your testimony tonight.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Sean Dockery. That's Johndockery. I live in Omaha. I'm married. We have 5 children, 12 grandchildren. I'm an opponent of LB 167. This bill criminalizes well-established effective treatment for children with unwanted same-sex attraction and gender confusion. They're an attack on the therapist's freedom of speech and families' basic human rights and religious freedom. Even though some states have passed laws against conversion therapy, in the newest ruling last week, U.S. Magistrate Judge Amanda Sansone wrote a recommendation to District Court that Tampa Ordinance 2017-17 banning conversion therapy and be rejected because it violates every test of the First Amendment. Legal experts have predicted these counseling bans would fall and eventually be ruled unconstitutional across the board. The goal is to move one of the multiple cases now pending onto the Supreme Court. The availability of conversion therapy is just as important as LBGT affirmative therapy is for those who want it. Conversion therapy is talk therapy. Talk therapy is much less invasive than LBGT affirmative therapy, which can include puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and even sex reassignment surgery with the potential surgical removal or modification of body parts. Parents and their children often need help with the difficult reality of unwanted same-sex attraction and gender confusion. Children always need love and a sense of belonging from their families. Please do not criminalize safe, credible therapy options for families. There is no other health topic that a qualified health care provider is not allowed to get paid for or talk about. Silencing and censorship is an absurd attempt to limit parents' choice. Parents and children should always have a choice in this matter. Please vote no to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dockery. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Wayne has a question.
Not necessarily a question, just thank you for coming. I know we live around the corner from each other, so I might need a ride home.
Hi, my name is Amber. Good evening, maybe good morning, A-M-B-E-R, Parker, P-A-R-K-E-R. I just want to say that all life matters. I'm an opponent to LB 167 and LB 168. I will first start by sharing some facts that have taken place in Nebraska. I believe in 2017, at an Omaha Public School Board meeting, the Sherwood Foundation offered to pay to hire more social workers for the Omaha Public Schools for a certain amount of time and certain school districts for the Omaha OPS. One of the board members, Yolanda, shared her concerns on this. I found myself asking the question to myself, why would the Sherwood Foundation be willing to pay for more social workers? And what is the purpose in having more social workers in certain school districts within Omaha Public Schools? The Sherwood Foundation is funded under the Berkshire Hathaway stock. Susie Buffett chairs the Sherwood Foundation, the Buffett Early Childhood Fund. Another organization that has connections to the Sherwood Foundation shows that State Senator Adam Moorfield is the executive director of Nebraskans for Civic Reform, a Sherwood-funded nonprofit. In 2016, the Sherwood Foundation's IRS 990 form reported donations to Nebraskans for Civic Reform totaling over $269,000. You can go to guidestar.org to see the IRS 990 private foundation form in the public domain to read more information in the nonprofit database. Civic Nebraska, Senator Moorfield is the founder and executive director, and they also had over 100 poll watchers, I know, this last election. A couple of years ago, Senator Moorfield introduced a legislative resolution 334. It was heard in the Education Committee on September 10, 2015. It was a study the integral link between academic achievement and risky health behaviors. Many voiced their concern on this study and felt it was a push for comprehensive sex education and Planned Parenthood to be pushed on Nebraska schools. Even a past Nebraska State Board of Education member, Patrick McPherson, personally shared his concerns and was an opponent on LR 334. Girls Inc. of Omaha has a director of counseling, Christian Hoger, as well as a counselor. Girls Inc. of Omaha's Director of Sex Education is a licensed clinical social worker who has served on the Friends Board of Planned Parenthood of the Heartland. She's also an international speaker who speaks at times to the Omaha Public Schools. Kristen Lilla, K-L-I-L-L-A, is a member as well for the Center for Sex Education, which is based in Morristown, New Jersey. It is the National Education Division of Planned Parenthood of Central and Greater Northern New Jersey. Girls Inc. is a national organization and has a board of directors, which includes Susie Buffett. The director of counseling at Girls Inc. in Omaha is Christian Hoger, and the director of sex education at Girls Inc. Omaha is Kristen Lila. Both are co-authors to helping write chapters on Unequal Partners, which is a Planned Parenthood book. It's concerning to see legislation with the purpose to quiet adults and children who are seeking help by a way of bullying pastors and counselors into silence. Oh, sorry.
We have your written testimony.
Okay.
We can read the balance of it.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions, but thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And your patience tonight.
Absolutely, and thank you for your patience.
Robert Klotz, ROBERTKLOTZ. First, would like to offer my sincere empathy for those who are harmed by any conversion therapy. This should never have happened. Secondly, I challenge psychology and its position that it takes on these matters. What I want to say here is if a child is mentally ill, it would be child abuse to say they could not have a counselor help them. If a child is abused, they can hate their own natural sex or become confused sexually due to the abuse they received by an adult or an older child. Sadly, this happens far more often than we would like to think. The poor child would obviously need help, and to arbitrarily and capriciously deny them conversion therapy would be in itself child abuse. Senators, if you sow the wind, all of Nebraska will reap the whirlwind.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Senator Hunt to close. Oh, we do have a number of emails and letters. Oh, anybody here in the neutral capacity? Okay. It's late. We do have a number of emails, too voluminous to read, other than to note that we have many emails and letters on both sides, and literally too many to read. So we'll just let the record reflect a great number of emails and letters. And Senator Hunt to close.
Thank you, Chairman Lathrop. Thank you, members of the Judiciary Committee. Let's bring it on home. I think it needs to be said on the record, and I would like everybody in the audience to know that if anybody is dealing with processing sexual abuse, sexual assault, you need trauma-informed, compassionate care by a licensed therapist, not conversion therapy. And after hearing this testimony today, I have a message for all of the people here and all of the people who could vote on this bill, every lawmaker in this whole state, that it is brave and it is courageous and it is revolutionary to be yourself in a world that contains a chorus of people that tells you you should not exist. And I stand with you regardless of your sexual orientation or identity. You should not be erased. You deserve a safe and supportive environment where you can achieve your full potential. And that is not a controversial thing to say. People have told me from the beginning with this bill that this was going to be a heavy lift, that this could never happen in a red state, but I think they're wrong. And I think that we are a lawmaking body of compassionate people. And I think that we'll take the testimony that we heard today to the floor of the legislature and move as a body to protect and affirm all of the people in the state of Nebraska. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we'll close the hearing on LB 167 and our hearings for today. Thank you.